What if Harry Potter married Alice Cullen in Vegas? By mad crazy storyteller yours, in eternity. Come on, Harry, when I said to go out and have a good time on New Year's Eve, this isn't what I meant. Harry, who was holding his phone a little way away from him, let out a sigh of exasperation as his best friend and sister in all but blood continued to rant on the other end of the phone. She had been at it for the last 15 minutes, based on the clock in the room. I didn't ask you to go all the way across the pond to Vegas for you to sit and continue to stare at the vista from your penthouse suite. This is supposed to be a vacation. A chance for you to let go. You're a single unattached billionaire, for Godric's sake. You are supposed to be out and about having fun. Having orgies and whatnot. What is wrong with you? Harry sighed yet again. If someone had told Harry when he was at Hogwarts that there would come a day in the near future when Hermione, of all people, would be asking him to go out and have no strings attached sex as part of a vacation in Las Vegas, he would have laughed himself silly at first and then tried to get said person checked out by Madame Pomfrey. But as unrealistic as it might have sounded back then, it was in fact happening at this very moment. Harry didn't blame her. He knew that she was worried about him. As Hermione continued to rant in the background, Harry thought back to all that had happened in the last 6 odd years since he took care of Tom once and for all during their last battle in the Great Hall of Hogwarts. That was another thing which Harry felt was weird. For some reason, once the man had died by his own rebounded curse, Harry had been unable to think of him as anything but Tom Riddle. Hermione once said that it was the result of him finally dying once and for all, which sort of made him just that bit mortal and gave Harry the closure he required. Whatever the case, Harry's life had most definitely changed that day. And irrevocably at that. It was only when he had accompanied Hermione on her trip to Australia to relocate her parents and restore their memories that Harry had confessed to Hermione that he didn't want anything to do with Wizarding Britain. In fact, he had point-blank told her that while he loved every one of his friends and would trade his life for theirs in a heartbeat, as far as he was concerned, Wizarding Britain could go fuck itself for all he cared. He, Harry Potter, was done with the lot of them. Although initially shocked, Hermione told him that with everything they had faced, especially everything he had faced, she couldn't really blame him and instead asked him what his plans were. So Harry told her that he planned on visiting Gringotts once they return. From locating her parents and settling his affairs with the goblins and then, based on the state of his finances, approach the ICW to finish his newts independently. After that, he would take it one day at a time. Living his life to the fullest, because he believed that's what his parents and godfather would have wanted for him. Hermione, though she had tears streaming down her face at the thought of her best friend and brother in all but blood leaving the wizarding world, knew he needed it and that any attempt to stop him would only push him away that much more quickly. Instead, she asked how he intended to continue his relationship with Ginny, considering his plans and all. Harry merely smiled tiredly and said that door was well and truly shut as far as he was concerned and he would always want the best for Ginny, it would just be as a dear friend and not a partner. So on his return from Australia, Harry had gone to visit the goblins, only to discover that Kingsley, in his capacity as the interim minister, had settled the debt on his behalf, citing it as a necessary action in the course of the war, as explained in the letter he had left with the goblins, which Ey shared with him once the topic came up. In the letter, Kingsley, while thanking him for everything he had done over the years for Wizarding Britain, had also written that while he couldn't undo the pain Harry had undergone over the years, going forward, his door was always open and if Harry ever needed anything, as his friend, Kingsley would do his best to make it happen, even if it meant just catching up over a round of drinks. So with a heart full of gratitude, when Harry asked about the sum total of his inheritance, the numbers he received in return were so staggering that he had to ask for an explanation. In response, he was told that not only was he receiving the entirety of the Potter and Black inheritances, he was also receiving quite a few other inheritances, which included names like Dumbledore, Snape and a few other families who had either included him as part of their wills or those that got added to his fortunes through the right of conquest, with those people having perished at his hands during the war without any surviving heirs. He then questioned them about Dumbledore's and Snape's bequests and was told that both had left strict instructions that Harry was to get his share of their fortunes if he had managed to kill Lord Voldemort and survive. If he didn't, well, there were other contingencies that had been put in place. Hence, Harry Potter walked out of Gringotts that day as the richest wizard in the world, with an assurance from the goblins that no matter where he was in the world, be it muggle or magical, he would never be short of funds, thanks to Gringotts' new collaboration measures, which now ensured that they catered to people operating and investing in the muggle world as part of their post-war expansion and financial recuperation strategy. Armed with an insane amount of money and with encouragement from Hermione, Kingsley and Andromeda, whom Harry had started looking upon as a favorite aunt owing to his custody of baby Teddy as his godson, Harry spent the next couple of years traveling the world and studying esoteric magic and got his certifications from the ICW. Another thing that came as a bolt out of the blue was his mantle as the Master of Death, which to Hermione's surprise meant a lot more than holding the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone and the Cloak of Invisibility. Not only was he the owner of 3 of the most powerful artifacts known to mankind, he was also essentially immortal and entrusted with keeping rogue magic practitioners in check, like sorcerers, warlocks and necromancers, as death, above all else, was all about balance. As explained by a jubilant Xenophilius Lovegood over a round of evening tea. Apparently, according to Zeno, as he insisted on being called, Harry would know when it was his tea. To move on from this world, and at that point he would also gain the knowledge of how to pass on this responsibility to his successor, or leave clues for them to attain the Hallows in case they were yet to be born. Soon, Harry, owing to his love of exploring new places and his ability to analyze and sense magic, something thanks to his years of playing host to Tom's parasitic Horcrux, coupled with his mantle as the Master of Death, joined hands with Bill Weasley and founded a company that took independent contracts from both the ICW and Gringotts to explore unknown magic-saturated areas and were in fact doing very well, if the number of times they were called upon was any indication. Not that Harry needed the money, but he refused to sit idle and do nothing. Amidst all this, Harry saw any of his friends getting married and settling down, like Ron and Hannah, Neville and Hermione, Luna and Victor, and most surprisingly of all, Ginny and Draco. And while he did have his share of flings now and then, he wasn't in any rush to settle down anytime soon. And while he was very happy with his life, as far as Hermione was concerned, if he wasn't going to settle down soon, the least he see. Oldby was a happy man whore as opposed to a moody grumpy git, as she so often called him. That was why, when Hermione had stormed into his house and told him in a no-nonsense fashion that she was booking him a week-long vacation for New Year in Las Vegas and that he was to take it, he had given her a long-suffering sigh of patience and said okay. So when he spent the first few days of his vacation cooped up in his penthouse suite, barring his sojourn across Sin City on the first evening of his vacation, his best friend more or less lost her shit, which led to the here and now, where Harry was getting chewed out by said best friend. I don't care how boring it is, you will go out tonight. You will meet some nice girl and have a good time, or so help me, Harry Potter, I will persona. LLY come there and drag your ass outside. Do you hear me, you lazy git? Exasperated, Harry said, fine, Hermione. I will go out tonight and have a good time. Now let me hang up so that I can get dressed and go out. I'll call you once I'm back. After a pause, he heard her release a breath and say, all right, Harry. You have fun, and if you end up getting lucky, I'll understand if you can't call me immediately. Now go out there and have some fun. Bye. And with that, the line went dead, prompting Harry to stare across the vista of Las Vegas on New Year's Eve, all decked out. Even for someone who had traveled as extensively as Harry, it was a breathtaking sight. It promised a good time for everyone who came there, no matter who you were or how much money you had, for it was the Sin City. So Harry proceeded to freshen up and get ready before stepping out of his hotel and walking into a bar that looked like it was particularly popular. After all, he did promise Hermione that he would have a good time, and Harry was intent on doing that. A little while later, sitting at the bar, Harry was beginning to rethink this plan, as all he had seen were women pasting themselves out in the name of having a good time. Soon, a group of women suddenly started shouting while standing around a table, woohoo. Come on, bye, you can do it, and on top of a table was a woman laughing and dancing sensuously to the music. The woman had stripped out of her business jacket and was only in a sleeveless tank top and knee-length business skirt. Harry had of course seen women stripping before, so this sight held no interest to him whatsoever. But when he turned away from that table to the one next to it, having a single woman sitting calmly and having a drink while looking like she was miles away, his curiosity was piqued. But what completely shocked him to the core and shook him was the fact that the next moment the woman's gaze met his, he felt it then. Lightning struck him hard. Section break. 4 days later, Harry heard his cell phone ring. With great difficulty, he opened his eyes. It was mostly dark inside the room and also outside. Not wanting to disturb the beautiful woman who was more or less passed out on the bed next to him, he slowly picked up her hand from his chest. The matching gold bands on their left hands shone even in the dim lighting. Images of him and the beautiful woman Ove. The last 4 days rushed through his mind. Sounds of laughter and passion dominated every visual. With a smile, he laid a soft kiss on the woman's hand before he slid out of bed. Carefully, he pet over the lamp which had fallen and crashed the previous evening due to their passion-filled antics. He also passed a painting that was now hanging in a crooked manner next to the dresser. He went out of the huge bedroom to the living area of the suite and looked down. Within the scattered clothing, his phone screen was lit up with the call. When he picked up the phone, he noticed from the caller ID that it was Hermione. He imagined how his best friend would react if he were to tell her that he had finally met the woman he would be spending the rest of his life with. His smile widened when he anticipated her excitement and the told you so's when he confirmed the lightning theory. "Hello, Hermione," he greeted. Even though it was barely 6 in the morning in Vegas, it was 2 in the afternoon in London. "Harry, where are you?" Something about her tone put him on instant alert. "Still in Vegas, Hermione. You need to come back, Harry. Are you all right? Is everything okay?" Although Harry was not in regular contact with a lot of people, he still did care about every single one of his friends. And if someone had done something to one of his friends, then heaven help them once Harry got a hold of them. "Yes, I'm fine." But he could hear the anguish in her voice. "Andy." No, not Andy. Harry adored Andromeda. She was the one adult he had met after Sirius who asked him to put his happiness above everything else. While she was very happy that he was willing to look after Teddy, she made it clear to him in no uncertain terms that that wasn't an ideal life for either him or Teddy. Not when he was so young and had all his life in front of him. So while he had custody of his godson, he let Andy raise Teddy instead, giving the child a semblance of normalcy. He had instead chosen to spend all of his free time, when he wasn't otherwise occupied, with her and Teddy, spoiling the little tyke rotten, much to the toddler's glee and Andy's consternation. Although the slight uptick at the corner of her mouth let Harry know that she wasn't exactly all that angry, just fondly exasperated with him. "Hermione, what happened to Andy?" She suddenly collapsed. "She's insane. Mungo's right now, that's all I know. It was lucky that Luna decided to visit her today. If she hadn't, I don't even want to imagine what could have happened. I was at my parents' place, so I'm on my way there right now in a cab. I'm on my way, Hermione. I'll probably arrive in a few hours." He ended the call and made a few other calls to his contacts in Makusa to arrange for an international portkey to London. He took a quick shower in the other bathroom. He came out and went towards the bedroom. He knew he had to wake his newlywed wife and tell her about his situation. He hoped she could accompany him. As soon as he stepped into the bedroom, he noticed that she wasn't on the bed. With rapid strides, he checked the attached bathroom and then the balcony. She wasn't there either. He called her phone, which rang several times but wasn't answered. Where is she? At first, he was worried. But a niggling doubt made him call the reception. "I'm calling from the honeymoon suite. Did you receive a request for a cab?" "Yes, sir. We had one waiting, and Miss Cullen just left for the airport 5 minutes ago." Thanking the man, Harry ended the call. She left him, without giving any explanation or even saying goodbye. His EY's then fell on something shiny on the nightstand next to the bed. It was her wedding band. He wore a matching one on his finger, which he didn't remove even during his shower. Anger and disappointment, directed at the woman he had fallen hard for and married, began to take over. But before he could do anything about it, his phone beeped, indicating that the portkey he had requested was ready. Grabbing the abandoned ring, he packed up and left the honeymoon suite, not knowing what to do about his day-old failed marriage. Section break. As it turned out, Andy had suffered a major heart attack. The healers at St. Mungo's, knowing who she was and her relation to Harry Potter, had in fact pulled out all stops to do what they could to save her, including placing her in stasis while they worked on a solution to somehow revive her. But in the end, it was all for naught, as Andromeda Tonks never opened her eyes again. Her funeral was a small affair, attended only by Harry, his close friends and, surprisingly, the Malfoy family. As she was laid to rest near her daughter and son-in-law. Andromeda and Narcissa had reconnected after the war and had kept in surprisingly regular contact. As Draco L. ed a broken and tearful Narcissa away after the funeral, Harry realized that for all her years of ignoring and pretending that Andromeda did not exist, the Narcissa Malfoy of today would probably trad every last canute that she owned to be able to talk to Andromeda one more time. And in that moment, Harry heard his beloved aunt's voice as she had said all those years ago when the first time he had turned up on her doorstep to check up on her and Teddy. "You are family, Harry. Last of the few that Teddy and I have left. So you listen to me, young man. I don't care how famous you are. I don't care how busy you are. You will make time for us. But by that I don't mean you have to look after Teddy and me. God knows you deserve a life after everything you have been through. No, what I mean is, Eve. And if nothing else in this world works out for you, even if nobody wants anything to do with you, know this, you will always be welcome here. For it is your house. We are your family. Family. That's WH. He had lost twice in the span of a week. First his wife, whom he had been married to for less than 24 hours, had walked out on him without so much as an explanation. Then he had lost the nay woman who had given a damn about just Harry, as she so often jokingly called him, his Aunt Andy. At that realization, fresh tears trickled down his cheeks, which he tried to wipe away as he tried to calm down Teddy. Teddy, his sweet, innocent godson, hadn't he lost enough? Wasn't losing his parents enough? Now he had to lose his grandmother too. Sure, he had Harry. But Harry would be the first person to admit that he knew zilch about raising a child. Soon it was all over and time to leave. Hermione stopped by and said she would swing by his place tomorrow. He gave a nod to tell her that that was okay with him. He spent the rest of the day and the first half of the next day playing with Teddy and taking care of him the way Andy had taught him over the years. Hermione turned up at lunch with lots of food in tow, which despite his initial reluctance, he was soon putting away with gusto. Once they had put Teddy down for his afternoon nap, they retired to talk over tea and discuss fond memories of Andy over the years. It was in the middle of this, almost as an afterthought, that Harry added, "Oh, and by the way, I'm married now." And as Hermione let out a surprised exclamation of what? Harry was soon telling her all about how he had ended up meeting Alice and the events that immediately led to their marriage. If Harry had come clean to his best friend and sister in all but blood at the first available opportunity. Across the pond, the woman he had ended up getting married to was sitting on a couch in an opulent living room with her knees drawn to her chest, with a lost look on her face. Still thinking about how to come clean and tell the truth to the rest of her family. It had been well over a week since her return from her trip to Las Vegas. 10 days to be precise, since she last saw him. Her traitorous subconscious supplied. For someone who had the gift of premonition and was generally very sure of what her future held, Alice Cullen for the first time since she had woken up as an immortal was unsure of what she was supposed to do. As far as she was concerned, it made her feel vulnerable. And it had all started with him. Even today, despite all the time that had elapsed. When she closed her eyes and tried to make sense of the events that happened during her trip, all she could see was a brief visual of a woman and a tall man dancing sensuously to slow, ping music at a club that jarred her out of her equilibrium. Shaken, she quickly opened her eyes. Damn it, despite trying very hard not to, images from what had happened during the trip intruded into her current thoughts. Although she couldn't recall much about what had happened during those 4 days, now that she was sitting so far away at her home in Forks, Washington, the images of the memories came more and more frequently. "Go away," she muttered when a stunningly handsome face of a man with a lazy and devilish smile flashed in her mind. Taking a deep breath, she thought back to her vision that started this whole thing. The family had finally settled in well in the District Peninsula after their move. Emmett, Rosalie and Jasper were in their senior year at Forks High School, whereas EDW. Art and her were both in their junior year. Carlisle had made a name for himself as a well-regarded doctor in the small town, and if the local rumor mill was to be believed, he was well on his way to becoming the chief doctor very soon. Esme on the other hand had well and truly stepped into the role of a doting housewife and mother. For all intents and purposes, they were a very well-off perfect family. A perfect family with a terrible secret to hide. If Alice had to be honest, it was a very mundane way of life. She knew that, but after almost 50 years of choosing to consciously live this way of life, she had no complaints. None whatsoever. And that brought her back to her emotional conundrum. She knew she had looked like a raving lunatic, if that was a possibility, to the rest of her family. With the way she had been acting since her return. But honestly, she just couldn't bring herself enough to care somehow. And somehow that realization didn't sit well with Alice. For as long as she had been living with them, It had been her job to keep tab of any danger that may befall the family and warn them of it, or if there was an event that would expose them, then she would inform Averio. Nay, so that they could be on the lookout and if required, do appropriate damage control so as to keep their cover. But since her return, she wouldn't trust herself even if her vision told her that it would be a sunny day in Forks the following day. Not that there were many of those to begin with. One reason why they had chosen this place to begin with. No sense in becoming a human-shaped disco light setup if you can avoid it. As Cousin Kate would say. But as often as it had saved her and the family over her 80-odd years of being a vampire, it was her ability to foresee the future which had landed her in this mess in the first place. It had been just another normal day. Everyone in the family had ensured that they had hunted and were all well sated, seeing as how it was the week leading to the new year. Meaning they would all have to be on their best behavior and take part in the variety of mandatory social engagements happening around them. She was just sitting with Rosalie and discussing the idea of possibly going to visit their cousins in Alaska when she had the vision. She knew what the place was even before the sight became clear. How could she not? It was one of her favorite dance clubs after all. It was clearly New Year's Eve based on the decorations in place. So when she saw herself sitting alone at one of the tables there on New Year's Eve, rather than celebrating with her cousin as she was just planning, she was intrigued. Her future self must have felt that pinprick sensation she got when she was being watched, as she turned to look at the person who was watching her. So Alice followed her line of vision, and that's when she first saw him. Now normally, when she saw someone in her vision that she was supposed to meet or encounter, for the lack of a better explanation, she saw the entirety of their future together in a fast-forward timeline mode. But when she saw him sitting there and looking at her, she saw nothing. No information was flowing to her at all. And she was sure her future self was feeling the same thing if the look of surprised curiosity on her face was any indication. And then he got up and started walking to her, and that was when she heard Rosalie shout, "Alice!" Coming back to reality, she winced, not only because of the volume of Rosalie's voice, but seeing the look of frantic worry on Rosalie's face when she realized she must have had a vision. As she saw Rosalie extending her hand to check on her, she waved her off and said, "I'm all right. It was nothing we need to worry about. Having known each other for such a long time, R.O." Sally wasn't going to be appeased by that, as was proven by her next words. "Alice, I know you. Tell me what you saw. You don't have to keep it all in your head." With a fond smile, she said, "Honestly, Rosalie, it was nothing, just something I need to think on before I can be sure." As Rosalie was about to say something, she put up her hand and said, "I promise you, you will be the first to know after I figure it out." With that said, she had gotten up, excused herself and came back to her room to make sense of that vision. Section break. 24 hours later, Alice was sitting in the aforementioned club. Sitting stock still with an expectant look on her face. And waited. And waited. He did not turn up. She frowned at that. Had her powers failed her for the first time? She shook her head as if to push away those lingering pessimistic thoughts. Sighing, she got up and exited the club. She came back again the next day. It was New Year's Eve. She knew in her heart that it would be today. So she again went to the same table and waited. Soon she was distracted by a group of young women, who all seemed to be colleagues by the looks of it, making a rowdy commotion. Unbeknownst to her, a smile formed on her lips as she looked on at their antics, and that was when she spotted him. He too was looking right at her, and as their eyes met, for the first time in her life, mortal and immortal, Alice felt like she was catching her metaphorical breath. And then he was walking up to her, and Alice, for some reason, started hyperventilating internally. As much as a vampire could hyperventilate, that is. If someone asked her to describe what happened next, she was sure that by the time she was done, the person she was describing said events to would think of Alice as a bumbling illiterate she was sure that was how unconvincingly inept her words were. Yet, the details were seared in on her subconscious. He had been polite when he had approached her and introduced himself. His accent gave away his British origins and the reason for his polite mannerisms. Unbidden, her mind told her that Carlyle was of similar nature. Maybe all British people were like that, she thought. "Well, why certainly don't make them like that here in the colonies," said a voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like Rosalie. Somewhere during these thoughts, she had thankfully introduced herself, and also without embarrassing herself, acquiesced to his polite enquiry to joining her at the table. There was a point when he was suddenly staring into her eyes, with surprising intensity, and then suddenly, as if something had shifted inside him, he had gone back to his affable self. He then told her about himself, about him being a dealer of antiquities with an extensive worldwide clientele and how leading to his hectic lifestyle. His best friend had sort of threatened and bullied him into taking this vacation. She in turn had told him that she was an independent fashion consultant and was into WN to just unwind after a few busy weeks at the Winter Fashion Week. Soon, they were both swapping stories from their respective travel experience, and the hours just melted away, and before they knew it, they had joined the others in the countdown for the new year. She knew that as he gathered her in his arms, that she should stop him. It wasn't fair on Jasper. He had been her rock. He had been there for most of her life. But in that moment, as Harry's lips descended towards hers, she just couldn't bring herself to stop him. And what a kiss it had been. She felt like she had been kissed properly for the first time. In between rising passion and murmured encouragements, they had somehow ended up in his penthouse suite. Alice knew that she should stop this. There was no way he could survive he night if she lost herself in her passion. And as he started divesting her out of her clothes, she could hear the voices of her family members, telling her in varying tones to stop this nonsense before it got out of hand. But, for the first time in her existence, Alice wanted to be selfish. Alice wanted to just let go and drown herself in this moment. It was too much, and for the first time, in a long time, Alice wanted to cry. Cry for how unfair destiny was being to her. Something must have shown on her face, because suddenly he was holding her with a tenderness she didn't know he possessed. And he was telling her that they didn't have to do it, if she wasn't feeling up to it. That was when Alice decided to throw caution to the wind and pulled Harry into a kiss that tried to convey to him all about her passion for him that probably words couldn't. And as he lowered her tenderly on his bed, she thought if she was going to be damned for eternity, whatever happened henceforth, this night would totally be worth it, even it meant that she would forever be tainted for this act of selfishness. She only hoped that Harry would forgive her, once he woke up. Section break. She had woken up to him gently kissing her on the forehead, while gazing at her with unbridled wonder. And as she realized that fact, she shot bolt upright and frantically started searching him for where she must have bit him. For some reason, her frantic actions seemed to amuse him. And that was when something else registered with her. She had actually fallen asleep. That was not supposed to be possible. Vampires couldn't sleep, yet she had fallen asleep. And as she looked at his amused countenance, she realized he wasn't showing any sign of someone who had been turned into a vampire. That brought her up short. Perturbed, she lightly gathered the sheets around her and got up from the bed and went over to the couch across the room and sat down. He didn't seem to be bothered by that action as he continued to watch her calmly. Suddenly, things started to fall in place in Alice's head. The lack of timeline progression in her vision after she met him. The way how he seemed to be completely at ease around her. Despite what she had normally come to associate with mundanes feeling uncomfortable around her, and how instead he had made her feel vulnerable. How he had not flinched despite feeling the coldness of her skin. How he seemed to have survived a night of physical intimacy with her, despite Alice completely letting herself go. But above all, she had somehow fallen asleep for the first time in 8 decades. And as those thoughts faded in her mind, she locked eyes with him, and before she could stop herself, ended up blurting the realization that she had made. "You're not human." This only seemed to amuse Harry more. He suddenly got up from the bed, in all his glory, and as she tried to commit his physical features to memory while trying hard not to feel flushed, he merely shrugged and said, "I'm more human than you are." Then as an afterthought said, "What I believe you meant to say is that I'm not a normal human." And as Alice tried to make sense of that statement, he pulled up his shorts and walked over to the couch and sat down. Then after looking at her for a moment, he continued in exasperated amusement. "And therefore as a stranger give it welcome. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." And despite her confusion, his quoting of Hamlet had her quirking her lips in amusement. And then he had proceeded to tell her that yes, he knew who or what she was, and that while he couldn't tell her who or what he was perfectly safe from her. That hadn't gone well with Alice, and as she tried to build up a tirade, he had simply forestalled her and said that while he knew what she was, he wasn't going to ever say it out loud, for the sake of plausible deniability, just like he wasn't going to tell her what he was, for the same reasons. For according to him, doing so in either of their cases would be like opening a can of worms that neither of them were prepared to handle at present. So instead, he had proposed that they both treat this as a nice opportunity to let their hair down and just enjoy the next couple of days without any expectations or apprehensions. They would be just two not-so-normal strangers, having some no-strings-attached fun. The ridiculous way in which he had wriggled his eyebrows as he said the last line, had made Alice burst in peals of laughter. And so, after Alice spent the next hour trying to come up with a counter-argument to Harry's logic and failed to do so, Alice had agreed to go along with Harry's plan. They spent the next 2 days, doing the silliest of things with Aya. See each other from pub hopping to dancing and having a lot of fun in general. Then there was the sex. And boy was she going to miss this. It wasn't that she and Jasper didn't have a passionate relationship. They did. The sex was great too. But Harry made her body sing in a way Jasper never had. Hell, forget Jasper, she didn't know she could feel half the things that Harry made her feel. What they hadn't factored into the equation was developing such strong feelings for each other. That afternoon as they lay in bed, sated after another round of sex that she was sure would have turned normal mundanes into quivering mass of flesh. He had confessed to her while drawing circles across the back tenderly, that he was not sure he would be able to forget her. That she had made him feel more alive in the last 3 days than anything he had done in his 24 years of being alive. And as she stared into those eyes of his, swirling with passion and emotion for her, Alice simply captured his lee. P.S. in a fiery kiss and tried to convey everything that she wanted to say but couldn't for some reason. It had been her idea. She had meant for it to be a funny throwaway idea. But somehow, a few hours later, they were both standing in a chapel and about to get married. And as Harry finished his vows and slipped the ring onto her finger, Alice knew the words she wanted to say in lieu of her wedding vows. "You're not my soulmate. Such a thing doesn't exist. Being a soulmate implies that we were meant for each other, that we were born to love one another, and I can't help but laugh at that idea," Alice said, as she took his hand into her own. "Loving you is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Every moment that we have spent together feels like we have been living on borrowed time. Yet, I wouldn't change any bit of it. Not because you're my soulmate, not because we were destined to love each other, but because I want to love you. Not because I'm forced to or because the world wants me to, but because I want it." And as she slipped the band on his finger and they had their first kiss as a married couple, she noticed the flash of light through her peripheral vision and most certain. Lee felt the tingle that flowed through her body. She raised a silent questioning look towards her husband, who simply shook his head and mouthed a silent later at her. As they come back to the suite as a married couple, she turned to Harry to ask him about what had happened earlier and he merely placed a hand on her lips and said, "Not tonight, love. Please, not tonight. I promise you, we will talk. I will tell you everything tomorrow. But tonight, let's just have this one night to ourselves as husband and wife, before we have to deal with the clusterfuck of reality called life." Although peeved initially, Alice couldn't help but agree that they should probably give themselves this one night before they got back to dealing with their real-life problems. So that night, Harry Potter and Alice Potter made love as husband and wife, silently conveying to each other what it meant for them to have found each other, fall in love and get married. Life could wait till tomorrow. That night was all about them. Section break. Alice woke up to the sound of Harry talking to someone on the phone in the other room. From the sound of it, it seemed like there was a problem. With a jolt, Alice realized that Harry had promised to tell her everything today. But that created its own set of issues for her, meaning she would have to come clean to Harry. And therein lay the problem. While Harry had indicated that he knew what she was, she wasn't all that sure about it. She certainly believed that he wasn't a mundane. And she was also somewhat sure that he didn't know that she was a vampire. But this had gone on long enough. It had been fun while it lasted. She had only come here to find out about him. Getting involved was never in the scheme of things. Neither was falling in love and getting married to him. While she was sure that her feelings for him were genuine, as was his for her, she couldn't and wouldn't put her family in danger like that. This needed to end. So as she heard Harry enter the shower, she quickly got up, got dressed, gathered up her clothes and her luggage. As an afterthought, she removed the symbol of their marriage, her ring with trembling fingers, and put it on the B.D. stand and exited the suite before she could change her mind. 10 minutes later, she was on her way to the airport in a cab she had ordered via the hotel. The days following her return to Forks had been chaotic and confusing to say the least. Their curious, worried and relieved faces when she had returned home that evening would stay with her for the rest of her existence. After the shock of her return had worn off, there had been questions and boy had she had to talk very quickly at that to starve them off. She had somehow managed to answer their questions with enough details to satisfy their curiosity for the time being. But she couldn't forever keep them in the dark. She was thankful that she had managed to find enough time to corner Edward alone and somehow convinced him to let her keep her secrets for the time being. Just to ensure that he didn't accidentally end up peeking at her thoughts and ended up doing something they both would regret. The hardest part had of course been facing Jasper. To put it crudely, she had cheated on him. Yes, there can be arguments made that her vision had forced her on that path and that despite having been together for more than 50 years, they hadn't actually gotten married. But as far as Alice was concerned, those were just petty details. And while she had no qualms about accepting the fact that if given a chance to redo the whole thing, her choices would be any different, it did in fact put her in the uncomfortable position of somehow confessing about the whole episode to Jasper and what his reaction would be and more importantly what the family's reaction would be. Once the truth came out. That evening after she had answered their questions, when Jasper and her had retired to their room, Jasper had taken her in his arms, and despite knowing that he had done that as a gesture of affection, Alice had wanted nothing but to get out of that hug and move away, for it had felt so wrong. Somehow the 4 days that she had spent with Harry, or more specifically, your husband, her subconscious snidely supplied, seemed to have overshadowed her relationship of well over 5 decades with Jasper. Frankly, she had wanted to come clean then and there, but somehow kept her head about it and stayed silent. But with each passing day, she had been finding it difficult not to confess to Jasper or the rest of the family about the whole reality of her trip. She had even contemplated confessing to Esme and Rosalie about the truth and asking for their advice, as they had both had experience of being with 2 different partners, but and she realized that both Esme and Rosalie had been abused by their respective first partners, something which she couldn't say was the case with Jasper and her relationship. So she had dropped that plan as well. Which brought her back to her present quandary. She knew that it was way past time for her to come clean about the truth to her family. But she had no idea how to do that. If only there was a way for things to work themselves out, she wished whimsically. Suddenly she heard the sound of tires screeching outside. Confused, she looked about the room to find out that all her family was sitting about the room, doing odd things to occupy themselves, and they were all looking at the door with curiosity. Just who was it that had come to visit them at their place? This hadn't ever happened before. Still, Carlyle simply put down the book that he was reading and walked over to the door to open it and see as to how their visitor was. None of them even bothered to follow, as they knew that with their super-sensitive hearing, they would be hearing Carlyle's conversation with their mysterious visitor, loud and clear. As Carlyle opened the door, they heard the car door open and close and then footsteps of their visitor walking up to the entrance to their house. "Yes, can I help you?" asked Carlyle politely. "Hello, I'm Harry Potter. I'm here to meet Alice," said a polite British voice that had every one of her family members turning towards her, causing Alice to mentally throw her hands up in the air. Great, her husband was here and now she had run out of time to come clean to her family. "Hello shit, meet fan. Hello, I'm Harry Potter. I'm here to meet Alice." As Harry finished saying those words, he politely extended his hands for a handshake towards the man who, for all intents and purposes, seemed gobsmacked. Just as Harry was about to ask the man if he was all right, he heard the voice that he had been so desperate to hear the last few days. "It's all right, Carlyle. Let him in." The message seemed to bring the man out of his stupor, and he extended his hand with an apologetic smile and shook Harry's hand, and as Harry returned the handshake with nary a reaction, Carlyle's smile became that much more genuine, as if he was delighted at the way Harry was reacting. "Please forgive me for my momentary lack of manners. I'm Carlyle Cullen. Please come in." Saying this, he opened the door and politely stepped out of the way, allowing Harry to enter the house. As Harry entered the house, he thought about how Carlyle's reaction somehow reminded him of Remus, who had been shunned by mostly everyone but his friends, for most of his life, because of something he had no control over. And while Harry knew that based on his Pie's report that Carlyle was very well off financially and was very well respected in Forks, he somehow felt that both Remus and Carlyle were both so very different and yet so very same. Both victims of an unfortunate past, trying their best to do good, and at the root of it all, both craved the same thing: acceptance. But all of these thoughts flew right out of his head the moment he laid eyes on her. He knew very well that his view was biased, but by Merlin she looked breathtaking, and that was without even trying. The moment their eyes met though, he couldn't help the smile that broke out on his face and ended up addressing her. "Hello love, This seemed to momentarily catch her off guard, before with an exasperated roll of her eyes, she got up and glided over to him with a grace that would have made trained ballerinas weep with envy. Just as she reached him, he couldn't help but take her in his arms and pull her into a hug, which said much more than what any words could convey as to what he was feeling in that moment. An action that she seemed to mimic. It was as if they were in their own world, surrounded by nothing but tranquility. The peace didn't last for long though. "What the fuck, Alice?" The words came from the mouth of the beautiful blonde woman standing across the room from them, that would have made Leonardo da Vinci drop down to his knees and beg for a chance to paint her portrait, and that was saying some. Ethan, considering he was friends with Fleur, an actual real-life Vila. But while all of these thoughts were passing through his mind internally, on the outside he merely looked at Alice with a raised eyebrow. To which she simply nodded and said in a tired voice, "Harry, meet the family. Everyone, meet Harry Potter, my lawfully wedded husband." The moment Alice had started speaking, Harry was ready to move at a moment's notice and was trying to keep everyone in the room in his line of vision. But before anyone could react, Carlyle raised his hand as if to stop the barrage of the oncoming questions and said, "I think you need to tell us a little bit more than that, Alice. After all, you have to agree that this is quite a shocking bit of news. Even more so, considering it is coming from you. So why don't we all sit down and you can explain as to how all of this came about?" His voice may have been polite, but Harry could very clearly detect both the curiosity and the worry that was present in Carlyle's measured tone. As if aware of his scrutiny, Carlyle then looked at Harry and said in as kind a voice as he could muster, "After that, I'm sure Harry would be happy to tell us his side of the story as well." Harry simply gave him a grateful nod and looked at Alice, who seemed to somehow be both thankful and scared. Harry reached out and took her hand in his and gave it a little squeeze as if to convey that no matter what, he would be there for her. Alice noticed this and gave him a warm smile and then led him over to a sofa. After they all had sat down, Alice introduced the others almost absent-mindedly. He politely nodded to each and every one of them, while almost all of them returned his nod. He couldn't help but notice that Jasper did so only to maintain a sense of civility. It almost looked as if Jasper thought Harry had personally offended him somehow. Harry put that thought at the back of his head as Alice started explaining everything from the time she got her vision to the moment Harry had come knocking at their door. It took a while, but not one of them so much as twitched, let alone react. But then again, what with them being vampires, it was only expected, thought Harry. And when the reaction did come, it came from the most unlikeliest of places. "Oh, Alice," said Esme in a fond, exasperated tone, he had so often heard from Andy when, according to her, H.E. did something particularly noble but stupid nonetheless. That seemed to make Alice chuckle ruefully, before she turned to him and started speaking again. She told him all about of her birth in Mississippi, a little over a century ago. About how she got turned during her time at the asylum, where she was committed to by her father, because he thought she was crazy owing to her clairvoyant abilities. How she had met Jasper a couple of decades later due to her vision telling her about him. That made Harry look towards Jasper, who was still glowering silently at Harry. At least now, his reaction makes sense to me, thought Harry. She then told him about how the two of them eventually found their way to joining Carlyle and of their life from that point on. And as she finished speaking, she looked at him with a sense of vulnerability, an expectation almost. As if her telling him about all of this would lead to him walking out on her. But before she could say anything, he simply reached out and put a finger against her lips as if to silence her and said, "Not yet, love. Before you tell me anything further about yourself and them, you need to first hear what I have to tell you. More specifically, you need to know all about me. Because, if after all of that, you still want me in your life, then great, I am all ears for everything you have to tell me. But, if there's even a chance had you feel it would be too much of a hassle, I would rather not get involved any further in your life and call it quits right here and now." All the while he was speaking, he looked at no one else but Alice, and while it looked like she had wanted to interrupt him a couple of times, at the end, she merely nodded, as if she had indeed resigned herself to that course of action. Then he turned to address everyone in the room and said, "I guess it's time for my side of the story then." And with that, Harry Potter, for the first time in his life, well and truly opened up and spoke about the entirety of his life. He told them about his family, their murders at the hands of Voldemort because of the prophecy and subsequent survival. He told them about his time at the Dursleys and of his time at Hogwarts. He also told them about his fame as the boy who lived and all the baggage that came with it. He told them about the war in his life thereafter and his professional engagements. He also wanted to tell them about his mantle as the not-so-mythical master of death, but for some reason he got this feeling that doing so now would not be a good time for it. So as he finished his story, he merely looked at everyone. He honestly wanted to laugh when he saw their expression. Who would have thought that the life story of Harry Potter would leave even a room full of vampires shell-shocked? And then, as if the trance was broken, came the first reaction. Like, what the actual fuck? It was Rosalie, and he couldn't help but laugh out loud. But instead of saying something, he merely pulled out the Elder Wand, gave an oath signifying the truth of all that he had told them about, and as the magic of the oath flashed out signifying it taking effect, he ended the demonstration by turning the tea table into a miniature kitten, before turning it back into a tea table. And there you have proof that everything that I have told you over the last few hours is nothing but the truth. It was Carlisle this time who first reacted. You have to agree how utterly unbelievable and unrealistic it all sounds like, Harry. I mean, a world full of wizards and witches, hidden in plain sight. A school of magic where you more or less ended up facing one or more life-threatening monsters, year after year. And not to mention the whole prophecy and the war with Voldemort. Harry, I'm a vampire who has witnessed every thing that has happened in this world for more than 350 years, and yet the story you told me wants me to get you checked out by a psychiatrist. I don't see any way in which anyone could come out of this experience sane and functional. Yet here you sit. Harry merely gave him a tired smile and said, who said I came out of it sane? Before he took a breath and looked away as if looking at something only he could see, and spoke. You have no idea what a mess I was those first few years. I knew we had won the war. But in reality, every single one of us who had survived had lost something. Some lost family, some lost a bit of themselves. For the longest time that first year, I couldn't stand to hear any sudden movements. I almost ended up cursing Hermione and Ron a few times because they came upon me unannounced. But it was not all gloom. I needed a reason to make something of my life. Teddy became that. I knew Andy was there to look after him, but I swore to myself that I would be there for him every step of the way. While he grew up, Teddy's first words were "Dada," and it happened a few months after the war. I was afraid that Andy would resent that. Instead, she told me that she couldn't be happier that Teddy had bonded with me to the point of wanting to address me. I told her that we should show Teddy Remus and Dora's photographs so that he can know who his real parents are. But she vetoed that outright, saying that while nothing can change the fact that Remus and Dora were his parents, they chose me as Teddy's godfather in the hope that if ever there came a scenario that both of them were not available and Teddy needed a parental figure, I would step up into that role. And while she agreed that Teddy should be told about his parents eventually, for now she wanted me to be the parental presence that Teddy could lean on. So in the process of creating a normalcy that Teddy could grow up in, I too find my solace and peace. Harry then turned to look at them all and said, and that brings me nicely to the next part of the story. He then told them about how Hermione had more or less forced him to go on a vacation, which led him to meeting Alice. He told them about how, as a measure of safety, he had scanned Alice's surface thoughts and realized that she was in fact a vampire, but somehow couldn't detect anything malevolent about her, so he decided to throw caution to the wind and explore that feeling he got the moment he had laid eyes on her. And then he looked at Alice and gave her a goofy grin before saying, now normally, I find the idea of being attracted to someone as hard as stone. About as appealing as you'd likely find sticking your pickle in a blast furnace. No offense, he added as an afterthought while looking at both Rosalie and Esme, both of whom merely nodded in response. But something about Alice drew me in. And to be honest, I was sick and tired of living my life with restraint. So for once in my life, I decided to be selfish and seek out that feeling of fulfillment that I got when I was with Alice. In fact, the day after our wedding, I was intending to sit Alice down and tell her all of this, so that I could make her a part of my life. But before I could do that, Hermione called me and told me about Andy, and while I still wanted to ask Alice to come with me, by the time I freshened up and came looking for her, she had already left. Here, Harry looked at Alice and said, a part of me was furious. I felt betrayed. She didn't leave a note. She didn't even leave a way for me to get in touch with her. I wanted to scream, but the saner part of my mind told me that there would be time to sort it all out later. Andy took precedence right now, as did Teddy, so I went back to England, and despite the best efforts of the healers, Andy couldn't be saved. I wanted to shut everyone out and cry. Andy was that one adult in my life who gave a damn about Harry. She didn't give two shits about my titles or fame. For all intents and purposes, Andromeda Tonks was the last parental figure I had in my life. Here, Harry unashamedly wiped away the tears that had escaped while he talked about losing Andy. He then took a deep breath and continued. But again, the saner part of my mind told me that Teddy needed me now more than ever. How do you tell a 6-year-old child that the one constant presence of his life was gone forever? So with Hermio, Nay and Luna's help I planned Andy's funeral while also gaining Teddy's guardianship formally. One of the few times I was thankful that I was Harry Potter and all the fame that came with it. And then after all the hubbub was over, I sat down with Hermione over tea one day and told her about meeting Alice and our marriage. As you can imagine, that didn't go well with her. I don't know if it was her pregnancy that made her that violent or she genuinely was that ticked off by this whole affair. Had I been any less capable with a wand, I would have been hospitalized myself. And then he chuckled and looked at Alice fondly and said, but bless her heart, the moment she had calmed down, she asked me that if I was truly happy with the marriage, and when I told her that I was, she simply just hugged me. Ian asked me to get off my ass and do everything in my power to bring my wife home. So I spent the next few days trying to find anything about Alice based on what I remembered from her telling me. Hitch involved talking to my friends and contacts at the Makusa, the American magical government, who ended up pointing me towards a local pie, who eventually found this address, which led me to here and today. And that's my side of the story. Harry then looked at Alice dead seriously and said, make no mistake, love. I very much want this marriage to work. But it has to be a two-way relationship. You know everything there is to know about my life and my responsibilities. I understand that you had a life before you met me, so it won't be easy for you. But if you don't want to be with me, tell me and I will make sure that it will be as if I never existed and you can carry on with your life. It is a big decision, Alice. Take your time, take the night in fact. Talk to your family and let me know your decision tomorrow. And before she could say anything, he simply put up his hand and said, I know a thing or two about having your life ripped away without any choice, Alice. I wouldn't do that to anyone, let alone you. So take the night and think it over and talk it out. I will be back in the morning. If you want more time, let me know. I'm staying at the Benson in Portland. I'll wait for your call. And with that he got up and gave her a tired but honest smile and was about to walk away when Carlisle's voice stopped him. Harry, you don't have to do that. We have more than enough room at the house here. You are welcome to stay the night. Harry merely gave him a polite smile but shook his head while saying, I don't think that's a good idea, Carlisle. Though I thank you for your hospitality, I will have to decline it. You need this time as a family. It will change not only Alice's life but yours as well. So please, talk it out as a family. Everyone, it was a pleasure meeting you all. Although I would have preferred that we met in better circumstances. Nevertheless, it was in fact a pleasure. Good night, everyone. And with that Harry Potter walked out of the Cullens' house, and moments later, he was on his way back to the hotel, wondering if this was going to be his last night as a married man. Harry knew he had taken a big gamble today, when he had told them all about himself. He knew that technically, it could end up backfiring on him, as there was a very realistic chance that Alice would want nothing to do with him, considering the amount of crazy things that happened in his life. Not to mention of what he could remember and understand of Alice and her clan, anonymity and leading a low-key life was pivotal to their survival. And that is why, Harry had also been proactive enough to place a subtle charm on all the Cullens to ensure that they wouldn't end up telling anyone else about him. If all went well, he would remove the charm. But if things went south, well, he was going to have to obliviate the lot of them anyway. Harry knew that he was being paranoid about it, but whether he was in love or not, the secret of Wizarding World's existence was much bigger on his own individual life, and that above all else, he had to protect the statute of secrecy. So Harry resigned and mentally prepared himself for a sleepless night of uncertain anxiety and what-if scenarios, hoping that one way or another, this would all be sorted out come tomorrow morning. The moment the sound of Harry's car faded away, Jasper was standing in front of her. He didn't shout. He didn't scream, he just asked a one-word question. Why? But that word conveyed every emotion he was feeling. Surprise, confusion, betrayal, and pain. She tried to respond, but her mouth just wouldn't move. It was as if the power of speech had failed her. Alice tried to come up with some reason, some response that wouldn't sound lame or make her feel a little less guilty. Eventually her shoulders dropped and she just quietly whispered, "I don't know. I honestly don't. There were so many opportunities for me to stop it." She then looked up at Jasper and said, "Harry gave me plenty of chances to back out. But I didn't, because when it came down to it, for once in my life, I wanted to feel normal Jasper. A part of me that I didn't know existed, had somehow always yearned for it. And in that moment, when Harry walked up to my table and introduced himself, that part of me chose to act. There is no explanation or excuse that I can give except that for once I wanted to be selfish and do what I wanted, as a girl. Without thinking about anything or anyone. In that moment, I became so selfish that I was even mentally prepared to actually turn Harry, knowing very well that as a normal human, he wouldn't survive the night. If I gave in to my desires. That anything physical between us meant certain death for him. Knowing very well that there was a chance that he would curse my name and my very being for the rest of his existence. Once he woke up. Yet, I did it. Because that's how intoxicating that whole feeling of being utterly swept off my feet was. As Alice finished speaking, she silently let it for Jasper to understand the desperation behind her words. He simply stared back at her, impassively. Before she could say anything else, she heard Edward speak. "I think that despite what has happened, we should let bygones be bygones and focus on what needs to happen next." As everyone turned toward him, he merely leaned forward in his seat and said, "What I meant was, that whether we like it or not, it has happened. We can't undo it. What we can do is talk about what happens next. As in, does Alice even want to continue this whole marriage thing with Harry, or is she going to let whatever happened in Vegas be a thing of the past?" Before Alice could even start forming a response to his queries, Rosalie pretty much jumped all over Edward and asked, "What do you mean if Alice wants to continue this marriage thing, Edward? Marriage isn't a business agreement on a piece of paper that you can just rip off when you feel like it and shake hands and move on. It means something when you exchange vows with someone, promising to be there for each other. You can't just forget about it or ignore it and move on." Considering how Harry came all this way searching for Alice despite how she walked out on him, he certainly looked determined enough to make this marriage work. And why then would you think that Alice wouldn't want it? By the end, Rosalie was pretty much screaming at Edward's face. Emmett quickly but calmly pulled her back and responded to her. "Calm down, babe." I'm sure Edward asked that in a very open-ended way, meaning he wanted Alice to consider all her options before she made any choice. And while technically they might not be married, Jasper and Alice do have an actual life together, babe. As Alice just stood there and silently watched all of this unfolding, Rosalie was under no such compunction and responded with a cynical laugh before speaking in a tone full of bitterness. "They don't have a life together, Emmett. None of us do. We are all vampires. We don't have a life. We have a cursed existence." The silence that followed her statement drove home the fact that despite their best attempts, they were anything but normal. It was Rosalie who broke the silence. This time in a voice that almost sounded like she was pleading. "Jasper, you heard everything Harry said. You heard everything even Alice said just now in response to your question. Knowing what I do about how much you care for Alice, would you honestly begrudge her the life she could have with Harry, even if that meant she had to leave you? Knowing very well that Harry would do everything in his power to give her everything he can." It was Edward who responded to that. And quite sharply at that. "Rosalie, you know that's not fair. No one has any right to ask that of Jasper." Rosalie merely gave him a regretful smile and said, "But I am not Edward. Don't you see, I am not asking Jasper for anything. I just asked him if he would begrudge Alice the life that she could have. Take it from someone with the experience of being betrayed by the person you intended to spend your life with. Alice didn't commit a crime, Edward. She just chose not to fight the situation she found herself in and acted without restraint. And although it all started off as idle curiosity for Alice, in the moment when she actually came face to face with Harry, he managed to do the impossible. He managed to break down her walls and overwhelm her with an emotion she had never ever experienced. Vampire or not, when it comes down to it, all a girl wants from a guy is to make her feel wanted. Make her feel special. Harry did that. He managed to make her fall in love. But then reality caught up with her and Alice escaped. Sincerely hoping that it was all behind her, she came back to us, intent on carrying on as if nothing happened. Only something did happen, as was evidenced today when Harry came knocking on our door. And then she looked at Alice with eyes full of warmth and said, "Don't let him go, Alice. Don't let this chance go by. Things like these don't happen even in fairy tales." And then she got up and walked up to Alice and took her hands in hers and said, It won't be easy. There are still many things you will have to work through before you will ever come close to having any semblance of normalcy, but believe me Alice, just give it a chance. It will all be worth it in the end. I might have only met him today, but even I can tell that Harry absolutely adores you Alice. One just has to look at the way he looks at you. Plus you only have to hear the way he talks about his godson to know that he absolutely adores that child, and now that Harry has taken up his custody, if you do go ahead with this marriage, you will be there to watch Teddy grow up. I know physically he would never be yours, but Alice, for all intents and purposes, you would be the mother that child grows up with, and if there's one thing about being a parent that even Esme would agree with is that the bond between a parent and a child isn't defined by something as simple as blood. So for once, be selfish Alice and give yourself this chance. And I promise you, we will all be here for you, every step of the way. At these words, Alice looked about the room and all she could see in everyone's eye was acceptance. And as her eyes finally settled on Jasper, she walked up to him and stood in front of him silently. Jasper just looked at her silently. And then after what felt like eternity, but in reality only a few minutes, Jasper's shoulders dropped and he gave her a whimsical smile and said, "The first words you said to me in that diner all those years ago were, 'We'll always be together.' I didn't know it then. But you saved me that day Alice." And then his smile turned a little sad and he said, "But I guess, this is the end of the line for us." At that, Alice wanted to break down and cry. Instead, as she was about to physically collapse in despair, Jasper gathered her in his arms and hugged her close and just held her as the rest of the family watched. Section break. After that, Jasper had made it clear that while he was wholeheartedly giving his blessing to the marriage, he didn't think he had it in him to be able to witness it from close quarters. He wanted to go away. Carlisle understood his reasoning and logic and suggested that he spend some time with the Denali clan to begin with, before making any other plans. Jasper shot that idea down immediately, saying that if he even suggested that things between Alice and him were not right or that he felt like taking a break from family, either Kate or Tanya would insist upon visiting Forks personally, and that would lead to unnecessary complications. Jasper's idea was much more simple. Considering that money wasn't an issue, he in fact wanted to travel the world and see different places. He promised Carlisle that he would not stray from the chosen path and would take all the precautions and feed on animals as much as required to avoid any episodes that could hamper his anonymity. He didn't hang around for much longer after. Carlisle had made a few phone calls and soon Jasper was packed and ready to go. As he hugged Alice one last time, he too LD her to tell Harry that he better take care of her or that Jasper would hunt him no matter where he went and make him pay. That made Alice laugh, and then she had briefly held Jasper's face in her hands and told him to take care of himself. He simply smiled and said he would. He also told her that if she ever needed him, all she had to do was call and he would be there, no matter where she was. And then he was gone. That had been a few hours ago. Everyone more or less dispersed away after that to be on their own. Come morning, Carlisle had politely knocked on her door, to remind her to call Harry. She had called the hotel and they had connected her to his room. She had asked him what time he could come by the house and he had promised to be there by 10 that morning. So here she was, standing outside the house, along with Carlisle waiting for Harry to come. She heard his car approaching way before it became visible. The moment she noticed his car though, a gasp left her. Her husband was driving a white Lamborghini Gallardo, the convertible model. He had money to burn. That much was obvious. She then saw Harry step out of the car and all coherent thought left her. He was dressed in a dark blue denim along with an off-white full-sleeve t-shirt and was wearing a black leather jacket on top. All in all, he looked like the quintessential rock star. "And he is all yours," said her increasingly giddy inner voice. The moment he noticed her, he gave her the same roughish grin that did funny things to her insides. He then walked up to them and politely shook Carlisle's hand before addressing her. "Morning, love." Alice for her part simply wrapped her arms around him and mumbled her response. The three of them soon entered the house, where the rest of the family was waiting. Harry greeted everyone. As he sat down, Alice took a seat next to him. He first looked about the room again and then he looked at her and asked, "Going by the absence of Jasper, is it safe for me to assume that we are in fact going to be looking to make this marriage work?" And to that, Alice simply nodded. But before Harry could react or respond, Carlisle spoke. "But we do have questions." And as Harry turned to look at him, he continued, "You have to understand, Harry, that while all of them are technically adults, I do see them as my own So yes, while I am very happy that you both have found each other, no matter the circumstances. Marriage is a serious commitment. And I want to ensure that both of you are well aware of what all that entails. Harry merely nodded and said, "Of course, Carlisle. I wouldn't expect anything less. So tell me, what is it that you wanted to ask?" This time it was Edward who asked. "What is it that you do for a living? You sort of glossed over it vaguely when you told us your story yesterday." Harry barked out a laugh at that and said, "Caught that one, did you?" When Edward responded with a shrug as if to say duh, Harry simply nodded and continued. "I am what you would call a real-life Indiana Jones. Only, I deal with magical treasures and magically saturated sites." When everyone including Alice looked at him as if he had gone crazy, he merely threw his hands up in the air and said, "Honestly, that's what I do. I, along with a friend of mine, own a business that takes up independent contracts from both ICW, which is sort of like a magical UN, and Gringotts, the Wizarding Bank. To explore unknown magically saturated areas, to look for hidden treasures and whatnot, for a percentage of the actual treasure. I also have an actual antiquities business in the mundane world, where I end up selling any of the retrieved items that are of non-magical origin." Carlisle nodded at that and asked, "And would you say your business is doing well?" Harry simply nodded and said, "Of course." And then as an afterthought added, "Not that I have to be worried about money, what with my inheritance and all. But I refuse to just sit on my ass and do nothing. And yes, I have in fact managed to add quite a bit to my already substantial inheritance thanks to my successful business." At that Emmett leaned forward and asked, "How substantial?" Before Harry could respond, Carlisle gave him an apologetic look and added, "It's not that we are doubting you, Harry. It's just that owing to our longevity and talents, at least from the time she has been with us, Alice has lived a privileged life and—" At that Harry simply finished the statement, "And you want to ensure that I am capable of providing her with that life." As Carlisle let out a relieved smile, Harry simply smiled and said, "I honestly don't mind that you asked. In fact, I am very glad that you did." Harry then looked at Emmett and said, "To answer your question, based on what I remember of my last bank statement, when you factor in the galleon, the Wizarding world's currency's ongoing conversion rate to US dollar, I would say my overall net worth is about a little over 1.5 trillion US dollars. Absolute silence was the response he got. For as long as possible, Alice had been helping the family invest in successful stocks and bonds, which had led to their fortunes growing considerably. But even she couldn't fathom amassing an inheritance of the size Harry just mentioned. When you factor in that Harry was the last of his family, that was an insane amount of money. Carlisle cleared his throat to break the uncomfortable silence and said, "Well, Alice, I believe money is not something you will ever have to worry about in your marriage." And as Harry chuckled at that, Rosalie fired the next salvo. "Harry, you mentioned taking your godson's guardianship yesterday." To which Harry frowned and nodded, and she plowed on with her question. "Will he be staying with you then?" At that, Harry simply said, "Yes, Teddy will in fact be staying with me." He then turned toward Alice and said, "And while I can understand and acknowledge that you might not want or feel like playing mother to a 6-year-old child, I do expect you to be civil towards him." And then his face softened and he continued, "Understand, Alice, Teddy doesn't remember either of his birth parents. He calls me Daddy, and the one person whom he has known since birth. His grandmother isn't there for him anymore. There's a good chance you two could end up getting like a house on fire. But there's also a chance that he might take some time to warm up to you. All I ask of you is to show him some patience. He truly is an absolute angel of a child, with minimum fussiness. So please, give him a chance." At that Alice simply smiled and squeezed his hand as a gesture. The next question came from Esme of all people. And that brings us nicely to the question I wanted to ask. Where will you two be living? At that Harry simply sighed and leaned back into the sofa and spoke. "Honestly, I haven't thought that far. Originally, the plan was to find Alice and if she agreed, to take her back with me to England." As Esme was about to say something, Harry simply put up his hand to stop her from saying anything and continued. "Obviously that plan isn't viable anymore. It is clear that Alice has a life here, which I wouldn't want to uproot if I can help it. We would still have to go England though. There are some formalities that needs to be completed there for Alice to officially be counted as my wife. But that should only take a day or two at most." And then he looked at Alice for a moment before speaking again. "In fact, given that I do have an official business in the mundane world that has handled clientele internationally and the fact that Teddy is yet to start his schooling formally, I can in fact move over here. What with the whole magic travel thing, I can always pop over to England anytime I want to, as long as I had at least a couple of hours notice. But considering that I am not particularly choosy about where I stay, I guess it all comes down to where Alice wants to live. And as Harry was looking at Alice for a response, it came from Carlisle instead. Actually, Harry, it's not that simple. When Harry looked at him quizzically, he continued. There's a reason why we moved to Forks. While sunlight doesn't exactly incinerate us, our skin does. Avenue an obvious reaction when exposed to direct sunlight. At that Harry looked confused and asked, what on earth are you on about? Edward merely rolled his eyes and said, our skins sparkle like the surface of a crystal when exposed to direct sunlight. At that pronouncement, Harry looked utterly gobsmacked. In fact, it was such a cute look on his face that Alice wanted to laugh out loud. Coming out of his stupor, Harry looked at Edward, dead serious, and asked, you're having me on, aren't you? To which, Edward simply shook his head, which led to Harry exclaiming, bloody hell, which really did make Alice laugh out loud. Harry then took a breath and said, okay, so that's an issue. But one that I might have a solution for. When everyone looked at him curiously, he simply continued. There are magical items that can provide people protection from curses and jinxes. I'll just have to talk to a friend of mine, but I am sure we can tweak the theory on the creation of such an object so that instead of a shield to protect against a curse or a jinx, it will instead cover Alice's entire body in an invisible protection layer that would stop the sunlight from coming in direct contact with her, as long as she is wearing the amulet. He then continued, thinking loudly. Of course, in case of a witch or a wizard, it usually burns their magic or bioenergy, meaning they have to eat a little more than usual to keep powering it. In Alice's case, I think we will have to enchant it so that it remains self-powering. As he finished speaking, he once again saw that every single one of them was staring at Harry with something akin to awe. It was Rosalie who voiced what every single one of them was thinking. You're kidding. Harry simply looked at her, said, not at all. I wouldn't joke around about something so serious. In fact, we use something similar for Teddy. That made everyone curious, which Harry noticed, so he continued. Teddy is a metamorphagus, just like his mother Dora was. A metamorph. Magus is what you call someone who is a natural shapeshifter, meaning they can take up physical appearance of anyone they wish to. Teddy, still being a child though, cannot control his morphing abilities and more often than not ends up morphing when he meets someone new or is excited about something, and since we wanted for him to attend a play school in the mundane world, we had to come up with an amulet for him to wear, which locks down on his morphing powers, thus allowing him to blend in easily with the mundane children. As Harry was explaining, he noticed that the mood in the room had tensed, so once he finished speaking, he turned towards Alice and asked, what is it? What happened? It was Carlisle who answered his question. Harry, based on what you told us, you will have to be very careful with Teddy. The Volturi, a group of vampires who are sort of considered de facto rulers of the vampire world, would be very interested in someone of Teddy's caliber. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Arrow ends up engineering a scenario which leads to them acquiring Teddy, if he ever finds out the truth about Teddy. As he was talking, the temperature in the room started to shift. In fact, it was as if something heavy was pressing in on all of them, making them unable to move from their places. And when she turned to look at Harry, he was leaning forward, listening to Carlisle talk with narrowed eyes, and there was an energy about him that made him look otherworldly. The moment Carlisle stopped talking, Harry turned from him and looked about the room and said, firstly, the whole nonsense about the Volturi being the de facto rulers of the vampire world is nothing but crap. The vampires have only one ruler, and that is Vlad, the Impaler. You most probably know him as Count Dracula. I know this because I have met him. There was an incident a while back which made us cross paths. He made the mistake of abducting Teddy. In retaliation, I ended up annihilating quite a few of his close followers before I rescued Teddy. After that, we came to an agreement. He steers clear of me and I don't burn him or his followers with cursed flames. Trust me when I say this, if Vlad ever found out about this Volturi, he would most likely find them and finish them. And then, the pressure that was holding them all in place, quite literally doubled, bordering on painful, as Harry simply said, but that is beside the point. I assure you though that anyone even remotely interested in Teddy for nefarious reasons, is in for a world of hurt, and once I catch up to them, there wouldn't be much left of them afterward. And just suddenly, as Harry leaned back, the pressure that was there disappeared completely, and although none of them have needed to breathe, the change in the room's atmosphere was palpable. For the first time since she met him, Alice understood the reason behind his devil-may-care attitude. It wasn't callousness. It was in fact confidence. Complete and utter confidence in the fact that if and when required, he could be the most defining presence in the room. Simply put, her husband was dangerous. Dangerous with a capital D. It was Emmett who broke the uncomfortable silence. "You're not a normal wizard, are you?" Harry simply let out a tired, bitter laugh, before responding. "I have never been a normal anything, mate. But believe me when I say, no matter how much I hate saying it, I am quite literally the most dangerous individual you will ever meet. Not because of the power I wield, but because there isn't anything that I wouldn't do to keep those that I care about safe. Even it means annihilating an entire clan of vampires, just so to keep my godson safe. I will do so happily and not lose a night's sleep over it." Then, as if turning off a switch, he was back to his affable self and said while smiling, "But we are not here to discuss Teddy or his protections. We are here to discuss as to how Alice and I can make this marriage work." And just like that, the mood shifted in the room and Esme got the ball rolling again. "Exactly. So tell me, Harry, how do you think people in your world will react when you eventually tell them about your marriage? Also, I know that both of you are married, but we will have to have a wedding here in Forks, if only to keep up appearances. Would you be wanting to do something similar back home in England?" Harry simply shook his head and said, "I don't think so, Esme. The thing is, while I know you are all vampires, the vampires that I have encountered before were all vastly different from yourselves. Firstly, they were all either direct creations of Vlad or were turned by one of his original children, meaning they were all magical in nature. While they do go out into the mundane world from time to time, they only do so for the sake of acquiring victims and drinking their blood. And from what I know from Alice, your entire family feeds on animals, thus allowing you to actually coexist peacefully with the mundanes. I haven't encountered anyone similar in my time in the wizarding world. In fact, vampires by definition are labeled as dark creatures according to the ICW. So I don't intend to tell anyone beyond my immediate close circle of friends, which would be Hermione, Neville, Luna, my partner Bill and his wife Fleur and Kingsley, Britain's Minister for Magic, about Alice's actual truth. For the rest of the world, I intend for Alice to be nothing but a mundane girl I met in Vegas, fell head over heels in love with and got married to. That would be the best way to keep the press from targeting her. Any woman I got married to, irrespective of who she was always going to end up on the front page of the Daily Prophet. At least this way, the extent of their coverage would be that, despite having his pick of the witches, Harry Potter ended up marrying a Muggle woman from the colonies. So coming back to your question, Esme, no, I wouldn't want to have a wedding back in England. I might have to throw a reception in the near future for my close and extended friends, but that's the extent of the celebration I am planning to have." Esme simply smiled at him and said, "Good, you're being practical about it. I like that. But according to the school records, Alice turned 18 last August. So we can technically plan a wedding anytime during the year. We can say that you two met each other at a Mon friends party and hit it off straightway, which led to you approaching us for Alice's hand in marriage, which led to a formal courting and engagement. People will assume the worst and think Alec ended up getting pregnant or something, for us to agree for her to be married so young. But soon when they see that nothing of that sort is happening, they will understand and accept the marriage for what it is, young love." And as she was speaking, Harry only kept nodding at her, showing his agreement with the plan, and as soon as Esme stopped talking, he turned to Alice and asked, "So what do you say, love? Now that you know that money is not an issue, where do you want us to live? Here or England?" Instead of answering immediately, Alice actually considered the question. She took a couple of minutes to go about the pros and cons of both locations before arriving at an answer. "While I wouldn't mind living in England eventually, I think for the next 2 to 3 years, it would be best if we stayed here in Forks to keep the cover that we have created. Plus I know you said you have been involved in Teddy's life since the end of the war. Now that he will be living with you full-time, we will need help when it comes to looking after him, Harry. You have your business to run and I have school during the day. And while both of us can drop that and be there for him if required, I don't think that's the right way to go about parenting a child. You said he is yet to start formal schooling. He can do that here. 2 to 3 years isn't all that long a time, Harry. Once I finish school, we can easily move to NG land, stating the fact that I got accepted in one of the universities in England. That would also give us a year or two before Teddy starts to attend Hogwarts. This way we can do everything without breaking the cover identities. Harry simply squeezed her hand and said, "Well-reasoned, love. It makes sense." Then he turned to Carlisle and asked, "I hope this plan is to your liking." Carlisle simply smiled genially and said, "Yes. It does sound like a well-thought-out plan." Before he could say anything, they heard Harry's stomach grumble. Harry for his part merely looked sheepish and said, "I'm sorry. I was quite nervous, so in my haste to come here, I skipped having a proper breakfast." As they all laughed, he simply said, "Tell you what, I'll step outside for a bit and grab something to eat. It'll allow me to stretch my legs for a bit as well. We can discuss the other details once I come back. This will also allow you all some more time to talk about the plan amongst yourselves." As he finished speaking, Harry merely stood up and stretched a bit to remove the kinks from his body from having sat so long, and then picked up his car keys from the table, before he turned to Alice and said, I'll be back in some time, love," and then nodded to everyone else and walked out of the house, and soon they heard his car speeding away. The silence that was left in the wake was broken by Emmett. "Well, say what you will about him, but the guy sure knows how to make his presence felt." And then, as his afterthought, he cackled evilly and said, "I can't wait for him to meet the Volturi." At this, Esme sharply called him out. "Emmett, what a horrible thing to wish for." To which Emmett simply threw his hands into the air and said, "Oh come on, Esme, even you have to agree that the Volturi have a stick up their SS about the whole ruling the vampire world thing. Can you honestly imagine Harry doing nothing to put them in their places the first time Arrow or Keyes or Marcus say something asinine to him?" At that, Edward simply snorted and said, "That would be one meeting we can in fact actually sell tickets for." That made most everyone in the room laugh, including Esme. Section break. Harry came back in about an hour. The first thing he did after coming back was to ask me if I would be okay with living in a separate house of our own. As in us, along with Teddy. I honestly hadn't given that idea any thought, and I told him that much. I also told him that on some level, I knew that was how it was going to be. So I was, I guess, more or less okay with that idea. Harry then talked to Carlisle, asking for his help in locating a good property that Harry could buy for us to live. Carlisle immediately offered for us to stay with them, specifically stating that both Esme and him would be more than happy to have us in the house. Even so far as stating that it would provide for a wonderful chance for Teddy and in fact even Harry to get to know everyone in the family properly. While he agreed to do so in the interim, and stating that he understood that things like finding a good ready-to-move property took time, even more so when one factored in all the paperwork involved in the mundane world, he made it clear that he would in fact prefer a place of his own to live, eventually. Harry also made it clear to Carlisle that money was no issue and that he would be happy with any property that I liked. That made a goofy grin appear on my face. Unbeknown to me, suddenly I was looking forward to the whole having a house to call our own. Theoretically, I knew that based on the kind of wealth Harry said he had, it was a given thing that he would be owning multiple properties. But this would be the first one that I can say would be ours. It would be our home. Suddenly, I couldn't wait for Carlisle to come rough with some options and was excited about the whole thought of turning an empty property into a proper home for us to live in. Harry also told us that he had spoken to Hermione, while he was out for lunch, about the whole wedding reception idea, and she had in fact advised him to go ahead and register our marriage with the ministry once we were England, and to simply put out an announcement in P.Rofet about our marriage and add the tidbit that there would be a reception that we would hosting for close friends and family as a way to mitigate any bad press. Everyone agreed that it was a very good suggestion, one that Harry should definitely follow through with. Carlisle, as someone inherently curious about all such procedures, asked Harry what registering their marriage would entail. To why, Harry simply said that since he was listing me officially as a Muggle in the ministry records, all we would need would be our respective birth certificates to prove that we were both of age, in Muggle world, as that is where we got married, along with our marriage certificate from the state's marriage registrar's office, which in our case would be the Clark County Recorder's office, which our minister should have filed within 10 days of our marriage. At that pronouncement, I had a moment of panic as I realized that if our minister had not filed our marriage wouldn't be considered legal. Now that we were working towards making this marriage work, I wanted it to remain legal and lawful. Harry, noticing my panicked expression, simply chuckled and said, "Relax, love. I got a call from the county's office a few days before I left England. They wanted to confirm that it was in fact a legit application, as the address listed on record was of my London townhouse. It's all taken care of. And then he grinned sheepishly and said while scratching his head, as if he was embarrassed. In fact, I do have a copy of our marriage certificate back at my hotel. I had brought it along just in case. You know, if I needed to provide proof that we were in fact married. Everyone laughed at that naive admission. Carlyle then asked him how soon did he want to return to England, to which Harry said he was prepared to leave this very evening if he could, as he was quite anxious to get back to Teddy. At that pronouncement, Carlyle excused himself for a few moments and was soon back with my birth and adoption certificates, the ones that were available on school records, and handed them over to Harry. He also promised to call one of his known realtors tomorrow to get him started on finding a suitable property. Carlyle also told Harry that he would highly appreciate it if we could come back by Sunday evening, seeing how I had to start going back to school from Monday, January 17th. Once I had come back from Vegas, I had requested him to call the school because I wanted some time to myself. He had gotten the required permission for me to miss the first half of the month. That was one of the best things about Carlyle. While he did care, he almost always minded his own business and provided any help that any of us wanted, without being nosy or curious. Surprisingly, Harry didn't immediately say yes to that. Instead, he excused himself for a moment and pulled out his phone to dial someone's number on his mobile. It was Hermione he was calling. We all heard him asking Hermione to talk to Kingsley about setting up a meeting first thing tomorrow morning for Harry to visit the ministry and register our marriage. From what I remember of the time zones, London was ahead of us by about 8 hours. And factoring in that Harry had mentioned something about arranging for a portkey, the instant magical travel option, if our portkey left at 8 in the evening, we would be arriving in London at about 4 in the morning on Saturday, January 15th. We also heard him tell Hermione that we would be returning to Forks the very next day and that he would tell her everything once he was back. He then hung up and called someone named Charles and asked him if he could arrange for an emergency portkey to London for tonight and have it delivered at his hotel's front desk. From the sounds of it, Charles didn't even bat an eyelid and responded in the affirmative. Harry then hung up and walked back into the room and told Carlyle that yes, we would in fact be back by Sunday evening. I checked my watch. It was 3:30 p.m. 2 days in a new country, surrounded by new people, after the kind of week that I had, was nothing but a recipe for disaster. I needed to feed. I caught Rosalie's eye and gestured her to meet me outside. Rosalie, bless her, didn't even bat an eyelid and simply left the room. I told Harry that I had a quick errand to run and that I would be back in a couple of hours max. He looked curious but nodded his acceptance silently, with a smile. Section break. The moment I was out of the house, I was running towards the woods. Rosalie joined me before I even made it to the perimeter. She just looked at me and I told her that after the week that I had had along with the last couple of days, I just wanted to be on the safer side and be completely fed before meeting any of his family members. Not that I generally had trouble controlling myself, but I just wanted to play it safe. The whole way to the forest, during the hunt and even on our way back, Rosalie kept peppering me with random tidbits of what she thought were useful information on how one should act as a normal wife. On our way back, fed up, I asked her point blank, what part of our marriage looked or sounded normal to her. To which she simply paused in her run and looked me dead in the eye and said, Alice, you have no idea how lucky you are. No matter how this whole thing started, it is ending with you getting a husband and most likely a son. You are getting a family. I love Emmett with everything I have and I know he feels the same. But we will never be able to have what you and Harry will have. So please, believe me when I say, you are lucky. Try living it to the fullest. And don't screw it up. And then she was running back to the house again. Neither of us said anything after that and soon we reached the house. We entered the house to find Harry telling Esme about all the things he knew Teddy liked and stuff that Harry could cook and Esme promising that she would make a run to the grocery store and ensure that the house was stocked with food for both Teddy and Harry. Apparently my husband can cook. As soon as we were noticed, Edward saw Ed, there. See, both of them are here. Can you now please answer the question? What question? I asked curiously. Apparently Edward hadn't been able to read Harry's thoughts like he could with everyone else and that had made him curious. When he had brought up this topic while Rosalie and me were out hunting, Harry had responded by saying that he would be answering it once we were both back. And then Harry started speaking. There's something else I haven't told you about. That made everyone raise their eyebrows and I honestly wondered how many more secrets Harry was keeping from me. Do you remember when I told you about E-war yesterday and how it ended with me killing Voldemort at the end. When all of us nodded, he continued. Well, apparently, there were repercussions to that. Now, before I tell anything further, I'll have to give you a bit of a background story. While there are many wild theories out there about the whole Master of Death thing, including the story about the tale of the three brothers in the children's book, The Tales of Beetle the Bard, the actual story is one that is entirely different, passed down in secrecy from predecessor to successor. We are talking about a time when magic was much more commonplace. There existed three brothers, the Peverells, who were all born within a few years of each other in the 1200s. All of them were uniquely gifted and very talented. But they weren't satisfied with the fame they got. They wanted more. They wanted to be more famous than the founders. They wanted to be more famous than Merlin himself. So they traveled far and wide and studied every bit of magic that they could, and it was during one such travel that they came upon a ritual that would allow them to trap and command the very forces of nature. They wanted to be sure. So they studied the ritual down to the last detail. They were elated. This was what they wanted. Something to etch their name in the annals of time. So once they had the correct lunar and star positions, they begged. And the day-long ritual, which required quite a number of ingredients and offerings. Eventually, as the ritual came to an end, they could feel the strain on their magic, as the very reality inside the ritual circle started changing. And they knew they had succeeded. He then looked at them all for a moment and then merely said, "The thing about ritual magic is, it requires balance. You can almost always get anything you want with ritual magic, but the catch is that you would have to offer something of similar value. For instance, my mother performed an old Wiccan ritual magic, which provided me absolute protection. The cost it required was that my mother had to willingly sacrifice her life in my defense, which ensured that the one who spilled her blood would never be able to touch me physical. Why, as long as there was someone from my mother's side of the family lived and offered me sanctuary, till I came of age, which is why I had to spend all those years at my relative's place." The three brothers had forgotten this cardinal rule in their zeal. And as the figure finished materializing inside the circle, they realized that while their call had been heeded, it had been done so by an entity that was far beyond anything they could have hoped. For their ritual had called forth an endless. And at this he grinned an evil smile, that looked so out of place on his kind face, it almost made Alice shiver. They had managed to trap death. And at that everyone in the room made some sort of noise. Esme and Rosalie both looked horror-struck. Edward and Emmett both looked shell-shocked, and Carly's Lou was gripping the cushions so hard with both his hands that they had turned white. Alice, for her part, was simply goggling at Harry. He simply grinned further as he took in their reactions and continued. Oh yes, they had trapped one of the primordial forces of nature and she was not happy. But the thing is that, happy or not, once she had manifested, she had to grant whatever wishes they asked for, before she could return. And so the brothers made their demand. Antioch, the eldest brother, asked for a wand that would be unbeatable. Cadmus, the second brother, asked for a way to command the souls of the dead, and Ignotus, the youngest brother, asked for a cloak that would hide him from death itself. And they further asked her that if anyone ever managed to unite the three items together, that person would be granted immortality and known as the Master of Death. Death was enraged. The impudent humans in front of her had not only trapped her, but they had the gall to not only ask her for items of power, but for them to then ask for immortality and to be known as her master was something she couldn't just stand by and agree. So while Death begrudgingly gave them the items they asked for, she decided to punish them by rewarding them and told them that she couldn't just grant the immortality part, as anything that is born has to die, and that was a rule even she as a primordial force had to abide by. Instead, she offered them a compromise. If any one of their descendants ever managed to unite the three items, they would then become her champion and would be required to carry out specific tasks in her stead. And in doing so, for the duration of their service, would become immortal and thus shall be known as the Master of Death. For Death knew that as ambitious as the brothers were, they would never let one another ever become the master of all the three objects. And if down the line, someone ever ended up combining all the three objects, well, she had enough work that she could certainly use all that help that she could get. The three brothers agreed to the offer and Death disappeared from their midst. And as he finished speaking, Harry stood up and suddenly he was surrounded by eldritch energy. Before he started speaking again, Ignotus Peverell's granddaughter Iolanthe Peverell married Hardwin Potter and brought with her a cloak that had since been passed on in the Potter family from father to son for generations. As he finished speaking, a fluid-like silky, silvery cloak materialized around him. Eventually, Cadmus Peverell's descendant married into the Slytherin line, whose last member was Thomas Marvel Riddle, more popularly known as Lord Voldemort. As he said that, a ring flashed into existence on his right hand's ring finger made of some silver K material with a black stone at the center. Antioch Peverell never had any children. He was in fact killed in his sleep by someone who also stole the wand. Centuries later, Albus Dumbledore would defeat Gellert Grindelwald in a duel to win it from him and would wield it for the rest of his life and be buried with it. Voldemort found this out and would raid his tomb to collect the wand and go on to kill Severus Snape, believing him to be the master of the wand. What he had failed to factor in was that while Severus did kill Dumbledore, he was in fact first disarmed by Draco Malfoy, making him the master of the wand. Months later, when I forcibly snatched his wand from him at Malfoy Manor, I became the master of the wand. And as he said that last part, his wand flashed into his hand and the entire atmosphere was positively cackling with magic, that they could all feel in their bones. And as he looked at them, Carlisle voiced the realization that they had all arrived at the Master of Death. Harry simply offered a humble bow and said, "At your service." And then Edward dropped the other bombshell that we had all missed. "You are immortal." Harry gave a lazy shrug and said, conditionally, "But yes, I am." That brought Alice out of her stupor, and then she was crossing the room and pulling Harry into a hug while laughing joyously and saying, "We can be together forever. I am not going to lose you." And Harry simply chuckled and hugged her back while saying, "Yes, love. You aren't losing me all that easily." That made everyone cheer out loud, as despite being happy for her, they had all at s own point during the last day wondered how Alice would react once it was time for Harry to pass on. And as the hubbub died down, Edward looked at Harry and asked, "So is that why I can't read your thoughts?" Harry simply responded by saying, "Yup. Apparently becoming Death's champion means I am immune to any and all mind-altering potions or magics, or for that matter even scrying and tracking magic, they could jeopardize my ability to carry out my duty." At that, Carlisle leaned forward in his seat and asked, "So what does that entail?" "Being Death's champion, I mean." Harry simply shook his head and said with an apologetic smile, "I'm sorry, but I cannot tell you that. And I mean, I cannot, not that I don't want to. I'm oath-bound not to reveal any details of my activities to anyone. That is the one rule I cannot break. I am only allowed to make observations or leave notes to my successor in my journal, which apart from me, only my successor would be able to read. Just like my predecessor did for me." "And the immortality part?" asked Edward. "Fully functional with all bells and whistles, till it is my time to pass on eventually," replied an amused Harry. The conversation wound down after that. Soon Harry got a text, which he checked and announced that he had to go back to the hotel to pick up the portkey that had been delivered to the front desk and also finish the checkout formality. Because it would be suspicious if he suddenly disappeared from in and around the hotel and the act got caught up in one of the surveillance cameras. So after Harry had left, Rosalie accompanied me to my room and we chatted idly as I packed. Esme soon joined us, and then both Rosalie and Esme started giving me yet another session of do's and don'ts as a new wife. While I was genuinely thankful to both of them for trying to help me in whatever way they could, it was frankly starting to get on my nerves and make me nervous. Soon, thankfully, I heard Harry's car pulling in the driveway and I picked up my suitcase and walked down to meet him. Harry walked in and with a smile, patted his pockets and said, "All set. We are good to go." Something nagged the back of my mind. I felt like I was missing something. As I was trying to think about what it was, Rosalie asked him a question. "Where's your luggage?" Then it clicked in my mind. That was what was nagging me. I didn't see any of his luggage. Amused, he merely patted his jacket's pocket and said, "Right here." Suspicious, Rosalie asked, "How?" Now even more amused, Harry simply took out his wand and walked over to my suitcase and said, "Like this." And then tapped my suitcase with it. Next moment, in my large suitcase's place was a miniature matchbox version of it. Shocked but delighted, I picked it up with a laugh and said the first thing had came to my mind upon seeing that piece of magic. "Oh, I can't wait for you to take me out for shopping in London." And as Harry groaned, everyone in the room laughed. When it was time for us to go, everyone moved outside and Harry brought out a £10 note and asked me to hold on to it and not let go. I did so, and then with a final nod to everyone, Harry said the activation phrase, "Rule Brit." Anya, and with a hooking sensation at the back of my navel, my world exploded into a riot of colors. The moment they landed in the portkey arrival point, Harry turned to catch Alice, only to see that she had landed perfectly on her feet. Chalking it up to her inhuman balance, he simply took her hand in his and led them out of the area. Soon they were riding up the elevators to the atrium. Since it was a few minutes past 6 in the morning on a Saturday, there wasn't much of a crowd in the atrium, and Harry was able to guide Alice past the thin milling crowd and onto the exit. Once outside, Harry made sure that they were alone before telling Alice that he was going to apparate them both to a clearing near his house, which was the magical teleportation travel method, and that she needed to hold onto his hand tightly. Once Alice nodded that she was ready, he apparated them to what according to Alice looked like an ordinary street in London which had a row of houses. Harry then turned to look at her with a boyish grin and asked, "Want to see a cool piece of magic?" Alice merely chuckled and nodded her head in agreement. Harry then looked around and then quietly whispered in her ear, "Why Potter lives at number 12 Grimmauld Place." As Alice was about to ask Harry what he meant, he merely turned her head in time for her to see a house appear out of nowhere by pushing aside the two houses on either of its side like it was pretty normal stuff. As Alice goggled at that incredible piece of magic, Harry merely chuckled and led her over to the front door, while saying, "That, my love, is the Fidelius charm." And then he calmly placed his hand on the door, which opened up in response. Before Alice could ask if this was how doors functioned in the wizarding world, Harry had suddenly lifted her in his arms, bridal style, and crossed the threshold of the house and said to her, "Welcome home, Mrs. Potter." Alice, for her part, let out a surprised but delighted laugh and simply said, "Why thank you, Mr. Potter." And the moment he put her down, he had her up against the back of the door and was kissing her as if his life depended on it. An act that was reciprocated just as enthusiastically by Alice. Eventually, Harry ended the kiss and simply pressed his forehead against Alice and looked at her with a goofy grin on his face and said, "Hi." To which Alice merely giggled. Harry then lightly brushed his thumbs over her lips in an almost reverential manner and said, "You have no idea how badly I have wanted to do that since the moment I walked into your home that evening." Alice simply pecked him on the lips and said, "Ditto." A few minutes later Harry offered to show her around the house, which Alice agreed to. Harry spent the next half an hour showing her around number 12 Grimmauld Place, while sharing various anecdotes from the first time he visited the house after his 4th year, to him celebrating Christmas with Sirius, to him inheriting it after Sirius' death at the end of that school year. He also told her about the time Ron, Hermione and him had camped out here during the Horcrux hunt and how Andromeda encouraged him to move in here after the war in his subsequent refurbishing of the house and decking it out in Gryffindor colors in memory of Sirius. By the time they got done with the tour, it was around 7 in the morning, and Harry, having had his last meal almost 10 hours ago without even factoring in the time zone jump, was starting to feel hungry. Harry then asked Alice what sort of animal blood she preferred, mentally preparing to check for available livestock suppliers in the nearby vicinity. When Alice told him that she had already fed last evening before they left, so she was good for a few days now, and told him not to worry on her account. So as Harry made a quick meal out of the items available in his pantry, Alice asked him about some of the things that had been bugging her since the first time they had ended up together, like how she was able to sleep. To which Harry had cheekily told her that he had used the infant sleep charm on her, that parents often used on small children, to help regulate their sleep cycle. This had made Alice break out into peals of laughter as she thought about the simple irony behind a child-oriented magic achieving to do what was generally considered impossible from a vampire's standpoint. Alice also asked Em about how she hadn't been able to harm him physically during their nights together, and Harry had told her that that was largely due to the purity ritual he had to undergo before taking on his duties as the Master of Death, and asked her not to ask him further about it as he wouldn't be able to tell her anything beyond that. To which Alice simply nodded her acceptance. In a bit to lighten the mood, Alice had then asked him about how many properties he had. Harry then went on to tell her in detail about all of the properties which they owned. He wryly pointed in a generic direction and said that he had inherited number 12 Grimmauld Place from Sirius. He had inherited the Dumbledore ancestral home from Aberforth Dumbledore, a couple of years after the war, which according to Aberforth's will, he had done so on Albus Dumbledore's instructions. Harry told her about how shocked he was upon inheriting the house in Spinner's End from Severus Snape in Cokeworth. Apparently, that was the neighborhood where Snape had grown up along with his mother Lily, when they were both young. So Snape had left it to him as a way for him to feel connected to his mother, along with a letter that was part apology and part advice on how not to live life. Harry then told her about owning the ruins of the home on Godric's Hollow where Voldemort had killed his family and he had survived the killing curse. Apparently, under Dumbledore's edict as the chief warlock, the Ministry had decided to turn the ruins into a war memorial against a perpetual lease renewable annually, for which he got a payment of 12,000 galleons every year with 7% year-on-year incremental clause, which based on Harry's knowledge was an exorbitant sum even today, let alone 2 decades ago, when the lease originally came into effect. Harry also told Alice that he had wanted to terminate the lease after the war, but Andy and surprisingly, Hermione had talked him out of it, saying that it was better to leave it as it was. As a reminder that sometimes even the impossible was in fact possible. He also told her about the land on which Potter Manor once stood, which was destroyed by Voldemort sometime after his parents went into hiding. Harry had no interest in building a manor anytime soon, but considering the land was located in Gwynedd, Wales and Lee Peninsula to be specific, at a stone's throw away from the Cardigan Bay, he hadn't wanted to dispose of the land and left it as is in its current state. Harry then told her what he knew about the history of Potter family. About how the members of his F.A. Miley had always been contributing members of the society as enchanters, innovators, duelists, healers, spellcrafters, educators and as most recently as his grandfather and father, members of law enforcement. Harry even told her about how Kingsley had offered to nominate and elevate his family's status as a noble house a couple of years back, stating that owing to Harry's popularity, it was almost certain that they would easily get the votes, but since Harry already had a seat on the Wizengamot, the Wizarding Britain's judicial custodians, due to his Order of Merlin, first-class award that he had received for defeating Voldemort, Harry had flat out told Kingsley not to bother, as he didn't have any interest in being involved in the politics of Wizarding Britain or for that matter Wizengamott's operational affairs. In response, Alice told Harry all about whatever she could remember from her human life and her life before she met Jasper and the Cullens. Alice was pleasantly surprised when Harry cheekily told her that even if they factored in the age at which Alice was turned, Harry would still be younger, as by the time the whole Master of Death thing happened properly and he became effectively immortal, he was a little over 18 years old, meaning technically, in human years, Alice was still older than him by a year, as Harry too had technically stopped aging post taking on the mantle. When Harry noticed that in all their chit-chat, it was now 8 in the morning and their appointment was for 9 at the Ministry, he led Alice back to the master bedroom and enlarged both their suitcases and offered her first use of the shower. Alice had simply smiled impishly and suggested they could save time by showering together. Harry was never going to say no to that. Suffice it to say that one thing led to another, and by the time they got out of the shower, they had just about enough time left to get ready and make their appointment in time. Section break. When they eventually made it to the office of the Minister of Magic, they were 15 minutes late. The reason for the delay was that when the time had come for them to take the flow to the minister's office, Alice had just about had a nervous breakdown when Harry had explained to her how the flow system worked. On seeing Alice's reaction to the flow travel, Harry had mentally kicked himself for not realizing that as a vampire, fire was something inherently harmful to a vampire, and harmless magical fire or not, it wasn't the best time to test as to whether or not it was safe for Alice to travel using flow. He had an eternity to do all these crazy experiments. So he had sent a patron's message to Kingsley stating that they would apparate to the Ministry's public entrance and would come in via the normal entrance. Alice had thought him crazy when he led her over to the telephone booth. But when he did the whole magic dialing thing, Alice had been positively delighted when the lift started descending down into the ground. When the wand checkpoint attendant had stammered upon noticing Harry, Alice was surprised but amused nonetheless. The moment they walked in, Kingsley had gotten up and crossed He distanced and pulled Harry into a warm hug, while wishing him in his inimitable deep voice. "Congratulations, Harry. I can't tell you how happy I was when Hermione told me the news. I'm so very happy for you." And then as he released him, he turned towards Alice, at which point, Harry stepped forward and made the necessary introductions. "Alice, let me introduce you to one of my oldest friends and Britain's Minister for Magic, Kingsley Shacklebolt, and Kingsley, allow me to introduce you to my lovely wife, Alice Potter." At that, a beaming Kingsley took Alice's hands in his own and holding them together, said, "Delighted to meet you, Mrs. Potter. It's an absolute honor. I can't tell you how happy meeting you makes me. My heartiest congratulations on your marriage." Harry could see that the Nestness in Kingsley's voice had surprised Alice. But she simply smiled radiantly and replied, "Thank you, sir. The honor is completely mine." At that, Kingsley jokingly wagged his finger at her and said, Now. None of that sir nonsense. Harry is family and now, so are you. You must call me Kingsley." Alice for her part, mere gave a light-hearted laugh and said, "All right Kingsley, then you too must call me Alice." And then Kingsley led them over to the table, where they all sat down, and Kingsley extracted a set of forms, that from the looks of it, was already filled, and extended them to Harry. Harry, while taking the forms, merely looked questioningly at Kingsley, who simply shrugged and said, "Not my doing, Harry. Apparently, Neville dropped them off with my assistant last night. I think, knowing your tight schedule, Hermione must have told him to collect the form and given him the required details, asking him to fill it out. This way, the two of you will just have to sign the form in. Provide the supporting documents, and I will have my assistant pop over to the department, file them and get the filing receipt as well as your marriage registration certificate." Harry nodded his understanding, and then, remembering Kingsley's tight schedule comment, asked Kingsley if it was possible for him to get a portkey to Seattle for tomorrow evening for a party of 3, to which Kingsley replied in the affirmative, saying that he would have his assistant pick that up as well when she would make the trip to submit the forms. Satisfied that it was taken care of, Harry simply took one of Th. E. quills from the desk and filled out his signature, and then extended it to Alice for her to fill in her signature. Alice, though, instead of taking the quill, looked at him as if he had lost his mind and asked, "You're kidding me? You expect me to sign with that?" Harry, understanding her train of thought, merely said, "I'm sorry, love. This really is how things work in the wizarding world," while Kingsley chuckled in the background. So Harry spent the next few minutes instructing Alice on how to use a quill. Eventually, she had gotten hang of it decently enough that she managed to sign the forms. And then Harry took out their marriage certificate and their birth certificates along with Alice's Muggle passport as her proof of American citizenship, and created copies of all of them, using a duplicate charm, and then gave them all to Kingsley, who then, after making sure to put them in the right order, added his stamp and signature and then called his assistant in. As his assistant came in, Leigh gave her the forms and told her to submit them whole, also telling her to visit the Department of Transport and arrange a portkey for Seattle for tomorrow evening. And as his assistant left the room, Kingsley asked Alice if she had ever visited England prior to this, to which Alice responded that indeed she had been to England before, but that was some time ago. Harry could feel that there was something on Alice's mind that was bothering her. So he simply squeezed her hand and said, "Something's bothering you. What is it?" With an apologetic smile at Harry, she looked at Kingsley and asked, "You honestly have no problem with Harry marrying me? I mean, how can you be so calm about this? I am a vampire. I agree that I am nothing like our magical counterpart that Harry told me about. But I am still not human." At that, Kingsley merely smiled in understanding and said, "Alice, you have to understand. We just fought a war that was all about blood purity. And no matter what anyone says, there are never really any winners in a war. Only survivors. Some fare a bit better than the others. But in the end, both sides lost quite a bit. I fought for the light. But I also know a werewolf who willingly risked his life time and again, just so that he could persuade other werewolves from joining Voldemort's ranks. I know a Veela who fought the war that she had no reason to fight in, except that her husband was fighting in it as well. What I mean is, once you live past all of this, all you want is some peace and for your near and dear ones to be happy. Clearly, being with you makes why happy, and as someone who has had the privilege of watching him grow up from a courageous young boy to a man that I am honored to count upon as a friend and family, I cannot ask for anything more." Based on Alice's reaction, Harry could tell that Kingsley's response had genuinely touched her, as was evident by the silent grateful nod that she gave Kingsley, in an effort to give Alice some time to find her composure. Harry turned to Kingsley and asked him about the bill that Kingsley and Hermione were planning on introducing at the next Wizengamot session, based on what Hermione had told him about creating a magical research institute in Britain. Soon, Kingsley's assistant came back with the receipt and the certificate, as well as the portkey, which she handed to Kingsley and told him the portkey was set to leave at 8 p.m. tomorrow, local time, before leaving the room. Kingsley immediately handed the portkey, which was a Muggle paperweight, to Harry, who simply pocketed it. Leigh then gave the receipt and the certificate a look over before handing them to Harry and saying, "Well, you're now officially married as far as the wizarding world goes. Congratulations, Harry Sim. Ply chuckled and then gave the documents to Alice and shook hands with Kingsley and thanked him for making sure everything went smoothly, who simply waved Harry off. 10 minutes later, they were exiting the ministry and Harry told Alice that he was going to pop them over to an abandoned alley on Charing Cross Road, from where they can enter Diagon Alley, Wizarding Britain's magical shopping district. To which Alice merely simply nodded. As soon as they landed in the alley, Harry made sure that they were alone and unnoticed before he took Alice's hand and led her to the leaky cauldron. As soon as they entered, Harry noticed Alice's surprise at how old-timey the whole atmosphere of the pub looked and the way the patrons were dressed, but she stayed silent nonetheless. Harry simply nodded to Tom, who had noticed their entranced, given Harry a friendly wave, which he returned, before proceeding to lead Alice to the back cellar, where he tapped the wall's correct sequence with his wand, to make the magical archway appear. As Alice gaped at that display of magic, Harry looked at her with a bright smile and said, "Welcome, love, to Diagon Alley." And then as Harry led Alice into the alley, lighted in the way Alice was spellbound by the sight of the magical shopping district, he was reminded of his own first time here. From what he could tell, Alice was trying hard not to show the excitement. But he could tell that for the first time since he had told her about magic in the wizarding world, Alice was truly understanding how wondrous and enchanting magic could be. Sure, he had told her all about his life. But hearing about it and seeing it for yourself were two different things altogether. Whether you're a kid or an adult, nothing quite put into perspective the beauty and wonderment of magic. Like a trip to a fully functional Diagon Alley could. Harry simply led her toward the towering wide structure at the end of the street, reminding himself to tell Alice more about his memories of the alley. When they were on their way back, they were soon climbing the steps of Gringotts, and as he had expected, Alice's reaction to seeing an actual goblin was pretty hilarious. Alice's eyes had widened to epic proportions and she was soon poking him and then pointing at the goblin, wordlessly asking him for an explanation, but kept walking with him nonetheless. Harry led them to an idle teller and requested to meet his account manager, and then as they were waiting to hear back from his account manager, he silently told her all he could about goblins being the official bankers of the wizarding world. A status accorded to them at the end of the last Wizard-Goblin War. They were soon led to a private chamber, where Harry introduced Alice to Ashclaw, the goblin in charge of all his accounts, as his wife, while handing over their marriage registration certificate. And although Ashclaw didn't have an outright reaction to Alice, the look that he gave Harry made him aware that Ashclaw was well aware of Alice's truth. After the regular standard briefing on his ongoing investments, Harry told Ashclaw to add Alice to all his accounts and for her to be provided with a bottomless money pouch, a payment seal, a debit card and a checkbook for usage in the Muggle world. At that Alice had gotten quite vocal and told Harry that it wasn't needed, and that she had enough money of her own. But Harry had simply told her that as his wife, it was her right. He also told Ashclaw to update the bequeathments and provisions of his will to ensure that if something ever happened to him, Alice would continue to have access to the money as his widow, while Teddy would still get majority of his fortune as his heir. If something unfortunate happened before Teddy could come of age, Ice would be his default guardian till such time as Teddy became an official adult. He also made sure to add a clause stating that in such case, Alice would also be serving as the executor of his accounts till Teddy turned 21. In order to ensure that Teddy had enough time to pursue whatever education or career he wanted and find his feet before being burdened by all these estate management issues. Alice once again tried talking Harry out of it, but Harry simply told her that he was doing it more for Teddy's sake in order to ensure that Teddy wasn't burdened unnecessarily and that above all else, he trusted her implicitly. Harry then had a sudden idea and told Ashclaw that he wished to visit the heirloom vault, who merely nodded and called forth a cart goblin to take them over to said vault. As they took the cart to one of the deepest parts of the underground cavern, Alice's delighted laugh could be heard by one and all. The moment Harry led Alice into the vault, Harry was assured that vampire or not, when it came to a vault filled with precious gems and metals, women were all one and the same. As a spellbound Alice kept goggling at the display of wealth, Harry merely led her over to a secluded part of the vault, where he proceeded to open a rectangular box and proceeded to bring her attention to it. The box was filled with rings that had been in the Potter family for generations. The only missing ones were that of his parents. For some reason, both his parents had been buried with their rings as well as their wands. And as a silent Alice kept marveling at all the rings in front of her, he merely told her to pick any ring that had caught her eye. When Alice had merely looked at him questioningly, he had merely shrugged and said, "From what I remember of Andy telling me, It's tradition in pureblood families to give the new bride a family heirloom piece as a symbol that now it was her duty to carry the family's legacy forward. To that, Alice had simply nodded a. Andy then picked a ring that seemed to be made of platinum and was intricately studded throughout with tiny solitaires on its surface, with a large rounded rectangle solitaire mounted in the center surrounded by even more tinier solitaires. It was extravagantly beautiful yet serenely simple, just like Alice. Harry simply flashed her a brilliant smile and proceeded to slide the ring onto her finger. Harry then asked Alice if there was anything else that had caught her eye in the vault, to which she simply shook her head, and soon they on their way back to the surface. Ashclaw met them there, with the required items for Alice. As they exited the bank, Harry explained to Alice that the bottomless money pouch was not in fact bottomless but in fact just called that because at one go it held about 5,000 galleons. Once you exhausted that amount, you had to get a fresh one in exchange for the old one by visiting Gringotts. The payment seal on the other hand was used when one didn't want to carry galleons on them. Although they were a recent development and were only currently in use in Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade, but the trend was catching on. Lastly, the debit card and checkbook W. As processed through the Barclays Bank in the mundane world, and when Alice asked him how that happened, he just shrugged and said that when he had asked Ashclaw about it, he had more or less told him that it was their trade secret. Considering the conversion rate was infinitely better, he hadn't bothered asking anything further. And as they were walking out, Harry went on to point some of his favo. Right shops in the alley and told her several anecdotes about the various shop owners, like how Mr. Fortescue had given him free ice creams during his stay at the alley the summer before his there and how Madame Malkin had altered his robes free of charge so many times. He also showed her the Weasley twins' joke shop that he had originally funded, which made Alice laugh delightedly, and told her that she would get to meet George in the evening. Soon they were back to the Leaky Cauldron, and seeing as it was close to noon, Harry guided Alice out of the Leaky Cauldron and back into the mundane world, and once there, asked Alice if she was feeling hungry. Alice, with an exasperated fondness, had told him that she wasn't even feeling remotely peckish, and that if he was feeling hungry, they should go to a cafe or restaurant where he could grab something to eat. So in short order, Harry simply led them to a burger joint in the vicinity which he often frequented with Teddy and grabbed himself a couple of burgers and then led Alice to a nearby park. As he ate the burger, Alice asked him as to how he intended to continue his work, seeing as he would have to be in the wizarding world. He simply shrugged and told her that he intended to discuss it over with Bill when he would meet him later tonight at Hermione's place. Harry noticed that it was little past 1 in the afternoon by the time he was done eating. So he realized there was something else they could do today. Hesitating only momentarily, he asked Alice if she would be willing to visit his parents at Godric's Hollow. Alice, for her part, had only paused for a little bit, before she gave him an understanding smile and told him that she would love to. So Harry had led her over to a secluded street before he asked her to grab onto him as he apparated both of them. They appeared near the kissing gate at the entrance of the graveyard at Godric's Hollow. And then, with a smile at Alice, he pushed it open and led Alice through the row of tombstones before he came upon his intended destination. The graves of James and Lily Potter. Harry bent down and almost instinctually conjured flowers and laid them at his parents' graves. He saw out of his peripheral vision Alice standing a bit awkwardly, not knowing what to say or how to act. He then stood up and beckoned Alice over with a smile. And as she came, he took her hands in his and turned toward his parents' grave, and then, as if he had a brainwave, turned to Alice and asked, "Would you like to see my parents?" At that, Alice looked at him like he was crazy and then gave a pointed look at his parents' grave. Harry simply shook his head with a smile and said, "I know they are dead, love. Nothing can bring them back. But do you remember what I told you about the second Peverell brother?" And as Alice tried to remember what he was referring to, he simply waved his hand over his right hand, and as the ring became visible on his right hand, he merely detached the black stone from it and asked her if she was ready. At that, Alice gasped and said, "You have the power to command the souls of the dead." Harry simply gave her a sad smile, took her hand in his left hand and closed his eyes and turned the stone over in his right hand 3 times. He knew from Alice's gasp that they had appeared. As always, both his parents had the same loving smile on their faces. As did Sirius, although his was mixed with a look of mischief that was uniquely Sirius Black. Harry smiled automatically at seeing the 3 of them, even if it was only this way. Harry simply pulled CE in for a side-armed hug and then looked towards them and said, "Mum, Dad, Sirius, I'd like you all to meet Alice." My wife and your daughter-in-law. And then, he looked at Alice and while pointing at his parents, said, Alice. Meet my parents, James and Lily Potter. And then pointing at Sirius, said, and my godfather, Sirius Black. It was his mother, who responded first. I am so happy to meet you, Alice. I can't tell you how happy I am that Harry finally found someone to settle down with. His father simply put his hand around his mother's shoulder and said, I agree. All I can say is, welcome to the family. Dear, and that the two of you should look after each other. Sirius for his part simply beamed and said, absolutely. Do not worry about anything, Alice. Marriage is something that is beyond species or class or so many other cliches that the people in our society as a whole frets over. It's about finding someone you love and spending the rest of your life with them. Both of you deserve all the happiness you can get. That seemed to bring Alice out of her shocked state. She simply licked her lips and hesitatingly said, thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Potter. And you as well, Mr. Black. It is a pleasure to meet you all. As his father and godfather mock bowed to her, his mother simply laughed and said, Alice, we are family. To you, we are James, Lily and Sirius. And as his family spent the next few minutes getting acquainted, Harry for the first time realized what being happy and content meant. Soon, Harry realized that it was time for them to go. So after a round of happy but teary farewell, his parents and godfather disappeared from their midst and Alice and him were left standing there holding each other in the wake of the silence that remained. Alice for her part, simply hugged him tightly and thanked him once again for this. And in that moment, Harry realized how much his parents' approval meant to Alice. Harry contemplated showing Alice the remains of his house at Godric's Hall. Albert soon realized that that would only make her sad, so instead he quietly apparated them back to number 12 Grimmauld Place. Section break. After their return, Harry Flo called Hermione and confirmed their dinner plans for 7 that evening. Alice then asked Harry if he did this whole talking to dead people often and as to how far this power went. Harry told her that while technically he could do it whenever, he tried not to do so regularly. He told her that he only did it once a year with his parents and Sirius, namely on his birthday and once with Remus and Dora, on Teddy's birthday. This statement had brought upon a confused look on Alice's face, and when he asked her about it, she told him about his statement back at her house in Forks about Teddy not remembering his birth parents. T.S. and Andy recommending to tell Teddy about his birth parents later. Harry simply smiled sadly and told her that he would generally call Remus and Dora after Teddy was asleep, so they could look in on him and Harry could tell them all about Teddy's year. Harry's face became a bit sad, before he said, you have to understand, love, that there is no magic in this world that can bring back the dead. And Teddy, being the child he is, will never be able to understand that at this age. If he knew that I could do something like this, the moment he had a bad day or was in a tantrum throwing phase, he would want to talk to them. That's not healthy, love. So Andy and I decided that we would tell Teddy about this whole ability of mine, just before he started Hogwarts, so that he could understand both he boon and the shortcomings of this ability. Remus and Dora agreed wholeheartedly to that suggestion, saying that they wanted Teddy to form meaningful relationships with people around in his life, rather than their misty replicas. In fact, I spoke to them only a few days back before I came to meet you in Forks. Like I told you, while I did gain Teddy's guardianship formally in the wizarding world, I had to file separate papers for gaining his custody in the mundane world and had to actually adopt him, seeing as how I wasn't a blood relative and was technically only a family friend. That is what took me a couple of days. As despite Kingsley pulling in all the favors he could, the process still did take time in the mundane world. Harry then asked her if she wanted to meet Remus and Dora, seeing how she would now be an active part of Teddy's life going forward. Alice took a few minutes before telling him that if it was okay with him, she would like to do so once they were back in Forks, as she felt that both Remus and Dora should meet her family as well, as Teddy would be growing up with them being a major part of his life as well. Harry agreed that that made sense, and then in a bid to lift the mood, he told her more about everyone they would be meeting at dinner. Harry also told Alice all he could think of about Teddy. Alice also asked Harry as to why he had asked for a portkey to Seattle. To which Harry told her that Seattle was where the MACUSA was headquartered, and that irrespective of which state you wanted to go to, if you were intending to travel by an international portkey to USA, Seattle was your only point of entry. Soon Harry told Alice that they should get ready as they would be traveling mundane style. 1 hour later, Harry led Alice to the main street where they could get a taxi to Hyde Park. Soon they got into a taxi and were on their way. On the way, when Alice asked him if he didn't own car here, Harry told her that he did in fact own a car. An Aston Martin DB7 Zagato, which he had largely bought to travel with Teddy when they went out on their trips in the mundane world, but seeing as how it was a two-seater, it wouldn't be ideal for today. The taxi soon dropped them off at Hyde Park, and as they got out, he noticed that Alice looked nervous. When he asked her what happened, she told him that she was in fact nervous about meeting Teddy, as she had never met, let alone interacted with a child, since she had been turned and wondered what if Teddy didn't like her. Harry for his part, had merely chuckled and told her that Teddy was 6 and that he literally didn't have it in him to hate anyone and told her to not worry so much. He then simply led her over to one of the 3-storied house in the street, with a garden on either side of the entryway. That was the home of Hermione and Neville Longbottom. Alice had expected tension. She had prepared herself for scrutiny, for the careful weighing of a stranger who did not quite belong in either world. What she hadn't expected was laughter. The door opened before Harry could knock. Neville Longbottom took one look at them, broke into a grin, and said, "About bloody time, mate." Harry laughed under his breath. The sound easy and familiar. "So," he said, glancing past Neville, "she's in full form today, then." From somewhere inside the house came a voice, sharp, fond, and unmistakably unimpressed. "Harry James Potter, if you make me stand here any longer, I will hex you." "Come in." Alice blinked. Harry squeezed her hand once, amused, entirely at ease. "See," he murmured. "Told you." Neville stepped aside, still smiling. "Welcome. You must be Alice." "I am," she said, and was surprised at how steady her voice felt. Harry shifted slightly, his arm coming naturally around her waist. "Everyone," he said easily, "this is Alice. My wife." There it was. No ceremony. No wait. Just fact. The word settled around her like something already true. Hermione was the first to come into view, one hand braced against the arm of the sofa, the other resting over the unmistakable curve of her stomach. Her eyes moved from Harry to Alice, assessing for all of half a second before softening. "Well," Hermione said, exhaling carefully, "it's about time I got to meet the woman who managed to disappear with you and come back married." Alice smiled despite herself. "I apologize. It wasn't planned." George, lounging nearby, brightened immediately. "Oh, that's even better." Bill and Fleur followed, Bill calm and observant, Fleur warm and direct. Fleur stepped forward first, kissing Alice lightly on both cheeks. "You are welcome here," Fleur said simply. Alice believed her. Luna hovered near the window, head tilted thoughtfully. "You don't echo," Luna observed. Harry winced. "Luna, I mean that kindly," Luna added. "It's peaceful." Alice felt the faintest chill, and then warmth. "Thank you," she said, certain it was the right response. The door closed behind them. The house exhaled, and then, footsteps thundered down the hallway. Fast, small, unrestrained. "Daddy." The sound hit her before the movement did. A small body came flying down the hallway, too fast, too reckless, pure momentum and joy packed into one word. Harry barely had time to brace before Teddy collided with him. Harry laughed, actually laughed, and bent without thinking, catching the boy and lifting him easily into his arms. Alice felt something shift, not loudly, not dramatically, just, decisively. Teddy wrapped himself around Harry, arms tight, legs locking instinctively. His face buried against Harry's shoulder like that was the safest place in the world. Harry's hand came up, steady and familiar, pressing between the boy's shoulders. "I missed you too, mate," Harry said softly, voice dropping into something private and warm. Alice stood very still. She had seen families before. Had watched people love each other across decades. Had understood affection in theory and practice. This was different. This wasn't affection. This was belonging. Teddy pulled back suddenly, still grinning, curls wild and untamed. His eyes flicked past Harry, and landed on her. The room seemed to pause with him. Teddy's smile faltered, not afraid, just curious. He studied her the way children do when they are mapping the world in real time. His head tilted slightly, eyes moving from her to Harry and back again. "Daddy?" he asked. Harry followed his gaze. "Yes, mate." Teddy hesitated, clearly thinking very hard. "Then, are you my new mummy?" The words landed without fear, without weight, just a question, honest and open. Harry sucked in a sharp breath. Alice felt it too, the ripple it sent through the room, through Harry, through herself. Harry glanced instinctively toward Hermione, eyes wide. Hermione, looking far too entertained for someone in her condition, simply shrugged and mouthed. "Luna." Alice almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she stepped closer. Harry adjusted his hold without thinking, Teddy still balanced easily against him. Alice lifted a hand slowly, deliberately, letting Teddy see the movement before she touched him. She met his eyes. Up close now, she could see it clearly, the curiosity, the openness, the complete absence of fear. The way he waited, not because he was unsure, but because he expected an answer that mattered. She smiled, not wide, not overwhelming, just enough. I can be, she said gently. If you want me to. Teddy didn't answer right away. He looked back at Harry. Harry smiled at him, warm and certain, and gave a small nod. Teddy turned back to her and nodded too. Slow, decisive, yes. Something in her chest cracked open. Alice opened her arms. Then, she said softly, how about you give your new mummy a hug? She barely finished the sentence. Teddy launched himself at her with all the force of a child who had made up his mind. She caught him easily, stronger than she looked, and lifted him without effort. He fit perfectly. Teddy tucked himself against her, small hands fisting into her sweater, his face pressed against her shoulder like he had always belonged there. Alice closed her eyes, and suddenly she understood. Rosalie hadn't been exaggerating. This wasn't metaphor. This wasn't possibility. For all intents and purposes, this was her child, and in that quiet, grounded moment, with Teddy breathing against her and Harry watching her like he had just witnessed something sacred, Alice swore something old and unbreakable. Whatever the world thought it was allowed to take, whatever danger thought it could touch, it would have to think twice. Because this was her boy now. Alice had barely adjusted her grip when Teddy settled against her, small arms tight around her neck, utterly certain. Harry watched them, unmoving. Something in his chest felt too full, too close to the surface. Oh, don't get all teary-eyed there, Potter. George's voice cut in lightly, irreverent as ever. Merlin knows we've had enough dramatic entrances for one evening. The spell broke. Harry huffed out a breath, scrubbing a hand over his face. Shut up, George. George grinned, unrepentant. Just saying. If you start crying, Hermione's going to hex you, and I really don't want to explain that to the kid. Hermione, from the sofa, didn't even look up. He's not wrong. Alice laughed, a small, surprised sound, and Teddy tightened his hold just a little, as if to say mine. And just like that, the room exhaled. Hermione cleared her throat. Well, she said, shifting carefully on the sofa and patting the space beside her, why don't you come sit here, Alice? You look like you've been standing long enough. Alice hesitated only a fraction of a second. Then she moved. As she lowered herself onto the sofa, she adjusted her hold on Teddy without thinking, a smooth, instinctive shift that placed him comfortably in her lap. His back settling against her, small legs fitting naturally along her thigh. Teddy didn't protest, didn't fidget, he simply sighed, a deep, content sound, and leaned into her as though this was how it had always been. Alice felt it then, not surprise, recognition. Her arm curved around him easily, protective without being tight. One hand came up to rest at his shoulder, thumb brushing absent-mindedly along the seam of his sleeve. She hadn't planned it, she hadn't thought it, her body had just known. Hermione noticed. Of course she did. Her eyes softened, something in spoken passion over her face as she watched the way Alice adjusted Teddy's weight, the way Teddy's fingers curled into the fabric of her jumper-like muscle memory. Hermione smiled, slow, quiet, knowing. Well, she said lightly, looks like he's decided. Alice glanced down at Teddy. He had already relaxed completely, head tipped slightly against her chest, trusting, unguarded. And in that moment, with the room warm and familiar around her, Alice understood something profound and terrifying and wonderful all at once. This wasn't something she was stepping into. It was something she had been ready for long before she knew it. The universe hadn't asked. It had simply placed him in her arms. And waited. Hermione shifted beside her, gaze flicking briefly to the window. The light outside was soft, overcast, harmless to most. Not to Alice. Ah, she said, as if remembering something mundane. Before I forget. Hermione reached into her pocket again. This is actually for you, she said. Alice looked up, surprised, as Hermione placed an amulet into her palm. Just a thin chain and a smooth, opaque stone that felt warm rather than cold. It's a sunlight diffusion charm, Hermione continued, matter of fact. Not a shield, that would draw attention. This simply bends what reaches you. Think of it as standing perpetually in shade. Alice stared at it. You, she began, then stopped. Harry didn't. I know, Hermione said again, gently this time. He mentioned the theory. I finished the work. She hesitated, just a fraction, then added, you are as much a part of this world as the rest of us, Alice. The words landed harder than Alice expected. She looked at the amulet again, then up at Hermione, really looked this time. This wasn't charity. This wasn't curiosity. This was inclusion. Alice closed her fingers around the chain, feeling the magic settle. Not invasive, not dominant, just there. Waiting. For the first time since she'd arrived in this world, Alice felt the possibility of something astonishingly simple. Walking outside, holding Harry's hand in daylight, taking Teddy to a park without calculating angles and cloud cover and exit routes. She swallowed. Thank you, she said quietly. Hermione smiled, small, knowing, satisfied. You're welcome. Alice glanced at Harry then. He hadn't said a word. He was watching Hermione with something like fond resignation, the expression of someone who had long ago learned that resisting her was both futile and unnecessary. And in that moment, Alice understood something with startling clarity. This was why Harry was alive. Not because he was powerful. Because someone like Hermione Granger had always been nearby, thinking 3 steps ahead, filling gaps before they became wounds, refusing to let the people she loved be diminished by the rules of the world. She was doing what Alice did for her family. Only in Hermione's case, it was not a strange quirk of fate, but a conscious act of intellect, principle, and character. Alice slipped the amulet on. Nothing dramatic happened. No shimmer, no flare, just a quiet sense of rightness. Hermione shifted her weight and pushed herself upright with a small, habitual exhale, not from strain, just from the awareness of her own center of gravity. Right, she said briskly, already turning toward the kitchen. Tea, no fuss, no assistance requested, no pause for comment. Alice watched her go, a quiet smile curving her lips. Even now, even like this, Hermione Granger moved through the world as if it would simply make space for her, and more often than not, it did. The evening didn't end so much as it unwound. Conversations loosened and reshaped themselves, drifting from one corner of the room to another. Tea was refreshed. Someone produced biscuits. Laughter rose and fell without urgency, the kind that came from people who had fought wars together and survived to sit quietly in each other's company. Alice remained where she was, Teddy tucked securely against her, his weight warm and unquestioning. She spoke when spoken to, answered questions about forks, about school, about the quiet life the Cullens led. Neville listened with genuine interest. Fleur smiled at her with open warmth. Luna drifted close at one point, studying Alice with serene curiosity before pronouncing, without preamble, that she liked her very much. George tried, once, to get Teddy's attention with a whispered joke. Teddy blinked, unimpressed, and promptly fell back asleep. At some point, Alice realized she hadn't consciously chosen any of this. She hadn't decided to sit, hadn't decided to stay still, hadn't decided to hold him this way. She simply had. Across the room, Harry spoke quietly with Bill about the logistics of setting up shop in the States, permits, magical jurisdictions, the headaches that came with moving enchanted goods across borders. Nearby, Hermione caught Harry's eye and made a small note to discuss shipping arrangements later, already mentally reorganizing his life for him with frightening efficiency. Alice watched them, understanding settling into her bones. This was his world, and somehow, without ceremony or permission, it was becoming hers too. When the time came to leave, Harry crossed the room and stopped short at the sight of them. Teddy, deeply asleep. Alice, instinctively angled around him, one arm secure, the other absently smoothing his hair. Harry didn't speak. He didn't need to. They left quietly, wrapped in coats and goodbyes whispered low. Outside, a black cab idled at the curb, its headlights muted against the night. Harry opened the door. Alice settled in carefully, Teddy never stirring. As the cab pulled away, Harry glanced at her, then at the child in her arms. Alice met his gaze and, for the first time that evening, smiled, soft, certain, unafraid. Section break. Alice decided she liked mornings with Harry. Not the dramatic sort, not the kind that announced themselves with urgency or magic or consequence. Just the quiet, ordinary ones, where the RLD felt momentarily unbothered by destiny. The amulet lay cool and unassuming against her collarbone as they stepped out into the street, its presence so subtle she almost forgot it was there. Almost. The light hit her skin and nothing happened. No instinctive flinch, no retreat into shadow. She paused, just long enough to register it. Harry noticed, of course. He always did. You all right, love? She smiled, slow and genuine, and took his hand. Yes, everything is perfect. If there was a particular satisfaction in walking openly beside him, in letting the morning sun find her without consequence, Alice didn't try to analyze it. She simply let herself have it. The morning unfolded easily after that. It began with shopping, her shopping. Harry lingered near the entrance of the first shop, hands in his pockets, watching with open amusement as she moved through the racks. Teddy stayed glued to her side, wide-eyed and delighted by everything. The mirrors, the colors, the way strangers smiled at her without fear or hesitation. Alice chose by instinct rather than thought. Soft fabrics, clean lines, clothes that felt like herself. Each time she stepped out of the changing room, Teddy's face lit up. Pretty, he announced solemnly. Every single time. Harry snorted. He's biased. Alice only smiled. She realized, dimly, that this was what freedom felt like. Not grand gestures, not declarations, just choosing things together. By the time they paid, she felt lighter than she had in decades, not because of the clothes, but because Teddy leaned into her side without thinking, and Harry hovered close in that unconscious way people did when they belonged together. It felt, unexpectedly, like a family. She stopped a few steps ahead of them and turned, studying the sight, Harry in his familiar, worn layers. Teddy dressed purely for comfort. An idea formed. Harry noticed her stare. What? She tilted her head, eyes dancing. You two could use some help. Teddy brightened instantly. Harry did not. No. Alice ignored him completely. She took Teddy's hand and steered them into the next shop. We'll start simple. Teddy was thrilled. Harry looked like a man being marched toward a very polite execution. There is absolutely no reason for this, he muttered, as Alice assessed a shirt against his shoulders. Teddy giggled. Alice chose carefully, colors that softened Harry's edges, pieces that echoed her own without being identical. When she was done, Teddy beamed. Harry eyed his reflection warily. I look coordinated. Alice smiled sweetly. You're welcome. Lunch found them at a small cafe tucked away from the main street. Teddy climbed onto the seat beside Alice without prompting, pressing close as if proximity itself were reassurance. Harry ordered first, then paused, eyeing Teddy. You hungry, mate? Teddy nodded solemnly. Then, after a moment's thought, added, I want a puppy. The words landed with all the casual inevitability of a child announcing the weather. Harry blinked. No. Teddy frowned. Why not? Because puppies grow into dogs, Harry said patiently. And dogs are work. Teddy's mouth twisted, his lower lip beginning its descent. But I want one. Alice bit back a smile. Harry shot her a warning look. Don't. She raised her hands in surrender. I haven't said anything. Teddy turned to her, hopeful. Mummy. Harry groaned. Absolutely not fair. Alice reached over and brushed Teddy's hair back gently. Puppies are a lot of responsibility, she said softly. They need care, and training, and time. Teddy considered this. I can help. Harry opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. We'll talk about it later. Teddy huffed, clearly unconvinced, and folded his arms with all the seriousness of someone deeply wronged by the universe. Alice laughed then, unable to help herself. Harry shook his head, resigned. He knew he had already lost this battle. Just not how. She caught his eye across the table, her smile unapologetic. You're enjoying this far too much, he said. She leaned closer, voice light. I warned you. I'm on his side by default. Teddy beamed. Section break. By late afternoon, London had softened. Not in temperature, not truly. January still carried its bite, but in mood. The city seemed to exhale as the day surrendered to evening, the light thinning into something gentler, more forgiving. The kind of quiet that made even the busiest places feel briefly human. Alice had never been particularly sentimental about time. Not after you've lived long enough to watch decades fold in on themselves like paper. But today time felt strangely precious. Not because it was rare. Because it was ordinary. Morning had been shopping. Lunch had been puppy warfare. The afternoon had slipped away in small domestic pockets. Teddy sprawled across the sofa at Grimald Place, chattering about which puppy would be the best puppy and why it absolutely had to be fluffy, Harry pretending not to listen while he wrote letters that were somehow both practical and faintly threatening. If the way his jaw set was any indication. Alice sat cross-legged on the rug with Teddy, helping him draw a dog that looked suspiciously like a misshapen cloud with legs. Every few minutes, he would lean into her. The way children did when their bodies decided a person was safe before their minds caught up. And every time he did, something inside her quietly rearranged itself. At some point, Teddy had yawned so widely it looked like it might swallow his whole head, then promptly declared, "I'm not sleepy," with the solemn authority of someone who had clearly never been sleepy in his entire life. Alice had smiled and brushed his hair back. "Of course you're not." Harry, from the armchair, had muttered, "He's your problem now." Teddy had brightened immediately. "Mummy." Harry's groan had echoed off the ceiling. Alice had laughed, and realized with a kind of distant surprise that laughing didn't feel like a reflex today. It felt like a choice. When evening came, it came with movement. A quick dinner, because Harry had insisted on feeding Teddy properly before travel, and then coats, shoes, the mild chaos of a child being convinced that yes, he really did have to use the bathroom before leaving, and no, he could not take his entire drawing pad just in case. "You can take one," Alice had bargained. Teddy had narrowed his eyes. 2. 1, she repeated gently. He had stared at her, weighing his options. Then slowly handed over the extra pad with a dramatic sigh that suggested he was making the greatest sacrifice known to mankind. Harry had watched the exchange with something like awe. How did you do that?" Alice had smirked. "I negotiated with Jasper for 50 years. A 6-year-old is light work." Harry had looked both impressed and mildly horrified. "Remind me never to play poker with you." "Too late," she'd said, and kissed him just because she could. The amulet at her throat rested cool against her skin, like a secret that wasn't dangerous anymore. It had been Hermione's gift, Hermione's solution, and the longer Alice wore it, the more she understood what Harry meant when he spoke about her. Not as a friend, not as a person in his life. As a constant, as someone who didn't wait for the world to be kind before she decided what was right. They didn't leave by flow. Harry hadn't even suggested it. He'd simply guided them through London's ordinary streets, then through spaces that shifted quietly, as if the city itself knew how to make room for what couldn't be seen. The ministry entrance, the public one, was almost anticlimactic after everything. A doorway that looked like it belonged to bureaucracy and boredom. A place where nobody should be surprised by anything, because paperwork was the great equalizer. Except they were still surprised. Because Harry Potter walked in. And he didn't walk in alone. The effect was immediate. Harry Potter, the name carried weight like an incantation. And now he was here with an inordinately beautiful woman who wasn't dressed like a witch. And a child the entire wizarding world knew as his godson. Alice did not need Edward's mind reading to sense what people were thinking. "That's her. That's the wife. He married a muggle. Is that Teddy?" She kept her chin level, her expression composed, as if she were born to walk through spaces that stared. Because in a way, she was. Forks had taught her to be invisible. Vegas had taught her to be reckless. And Harry's life was teaching her something else entirely. How to be seen without shrinking. Teddy tightened his grip on Harry's hand as a cluster of witches drifted a little too close. Staring openly, Alice felt him lean toward Harry, instinctively seeking the steadier body. Harry bent slightly, voice softer, not secretive, just intimate. "Eyes forward, mate, hold on tight." Alice heard every word. Of course she did. Teddy nodded and did as he was told, the way children do when they trust the person guiding them. And Alice realized, with a strange pang of tenderness, that Teddy did not brace like someone scared of danger. He braced like someone bracing for attention. Harry stopped at the portkey point, a designated area that looked, absurdly, like an ordinary waiting space that someone had tried very hard to make official. An assistant checked something against a clipboard. Their eyes widened when they looked up and saw Harry. "Mr. Potter," the wizard managed. Voice somewhere between awe and uncertainty. Harry didn't posture. He didn't preen. He simply nodded like a man trying to get through an errand without being turned into a spectacle. "That's us." The assistant's gaze flicked to Alice. "And, my wife," Harry said, as if the word belonged in his mouth now. As if he'd always been meant to say it. There was a faint ripple through the nearby crowd, not loud, not dramatic, but real. Heads turned, bodies angled, interest sharpened. Alice felt the stare land harder. Then Teddy looked up at the assistant, solemn and polite. "I'm Teddy," he offered. The assistant blinked, thrown off by the small, earnest voice. "Hello, Teddy." Harry's mouth twitched, as if he was fighting a smile. "He likes introductions." Teddy nodded once, satisfied. Alice glanced at Harry. "He gets that from you." Harry gave her a look of offended innocence. "I'm charming." "You are," she agreed smoothly. The assistant, clearly flustered, handed Harry a simple object, unremarkable, almost disappointing. Until Alice remembered that magic liked disguises. "Portkey activates at 8, the assistant said. "London time." Harry checked his watch. We've got a few minutes. The waiting was not long. But it stretched in that peculiar way anticipation always did. Teddy stood between them, holding both their hands, his body vibrating faintly with contained excitement. Alice watched Harry's face, the slight tension, the way his attention kept scanning the room without appearing paranoid. Protective, always protective, and she thought, not for the first time, that loving Harry Potter was not gentle. It was a decision, a daily choice to step into consequence. At precisely 8, Harry crouched to Teddy's height. All right, mate, you know the drill, hold on. Teddy's eyes were bright. I'm ready. Harry reached for Alice's hand next, fingers closing around hers with quiet certainty. You good? Alice nodded. Yes. Harry didn't smile for the crowd. He didn't play hero. Imply said the activation phrase, low and crisp, and the world hooked behind her navel. The yank was sharp but brief. For a moment, there was nothing but color and pressure and the sensation of bay ing pulled through a keyhole made of light. Then, Seattle. They landed. Alice's feet hit solid ground with the ease of someone who had crossed distances too fast too many times. Teddy wobbled, then steadied, gripping Harry's hand like a lifeline. His eyes widened. We're here. Harry exhaled, glancing around. Seattle. Noon. The air felt different, cleaner, colder, the light bluer. The world here had a different heartbeat. Alice checked the sky on instinct. The sun was present but weak, as if it didn't know how to commit. She felt the Cullens, climate in it, almost. Harry's posture loosened by a fraction, as though being back on American soil made him less visible in his own mind. Teddy looked up at Alice, then at Harry. Can we go now? Harry chuckled. Yes, mate, we can go now. They moved quickly out of the arrival point. No drama, no lingering. Harry had insisted on this. Minimal magic. Minimal attention. There was a car waiting, not Harry's outrageous white Lamborghini, because it would have been useless here. And certainly not practical for a child. Emmett's Jeep. The sight of it made Alice's mouth curve because it was so, Emmett. Loud without trying. Sturdy. Familiar. A piece of Forks transported into a bigger city. The keys were exactly where Emmett would leave them, tucked in a place that wasn't really hidden, just assumed safe, because Emmett assumed the world would behave. Lice opened the back door and Teddy climbed in without being asked, already yawning now that the portkey excitement had burned off. Harry got into the driver's seat with the ease of someone who knew how to handle vehicles even if he didn't need them. Alice slid in beside Teddy, and Teddy immediately leaned into her side as if the motion of the car was a lullaby. His eyes fluttered once, twice. He tried to keep them open. He really did. Alice watched him fight sleep with stubborn little determination, and her heart did something strange and heavy. He had missed Harry for days. He had met her, accepted her, attached himself to her. And now his small body was surrendering to exhaustion because he felt safe enough to do so. His head tipped against her shoulder. Alice shifted, carefully, turning her body to give him a better angle. Her arm coming around him without thinking. Teddy sighed, a tiny, satisfied sound, and fell asleep properly. Harry glanced in the rearview mirror once, eyes so F-10ing when he saw where Teddy had ended up. Alice met his gaze in the mirror. Harry's expression said everything he didn't speak aloud. Thank you. Alice didn't reply in words. She simply held Teddy a little closer. Forks was a long drive, but the road was familiar to her in a way London would never be. The green thickened, the air dampened, the world narrowed into pine and mist and that particular quiet that Forks carried like a permanent mood. And Teddy slept through it all, his cheek warm against her arm, his small hand curled into her sleeve as if he'd decided she was not allowed to disappear. Alice didn't move, not even when she realized, with slow, dawning certainty, that if trouble ever dared to look at this child wrong, it wouldn't have just Harry Potter to contend with. It would have her. Section break. Forks announced itself quietly, not with a sign or a sharp shift, but with a change in texture, the air thickening, the green deepening, the road narrowing as trees leaned closer together, closing ranks the way they always did. The world dimmed, softened, became familiar in a way London never could. The Jeep slowed. Alice felt it before she heard it, that subtle deceleration. The moment when motion gave way to arrival. As if on cue, Teddy stirred. His eyes fluttered open just as the tires crunched onto gravel. He blinked once, twice, then pushed himself upright, suddenly alert, scanning the world outside the window with the seriousness of a child who knew instinctively that something important was happening. We're here, Harry said gently. Teddy turned to him. This is where you live. Alice smiled. This is where we will live. That seemed to settle him. The engine cut off. The quiet rushed in. Alice stepped out first, instinctively positioning herself between Teddy and the open space ahead. Harry followed, one hand light at Teddy's back, guiding him without crowding. They weren't alone. The Cullens were already there, waiting, but not advancing. Carlisle stood slightly forward, posture open, hands visible. Esme was beside him, her expression warm but carefully contained, as though she were holding herself still by sheer will. Edward lingered just behind, watchful and silent. Emmett leaned near the doorway, all that usual energy reigned in. Rosalie stood to the side, unreadable, arms folded loosely, not defensive, just restrained. No one spoke. No one rushed. Alice felt a flicker of something like gratitude move through her. Teddy took it all in, the faces, the stillness, the space. He shifted closer to her, not hiding, just anchoring. Alice knelt so she was level with him, one hand resting lightly between his shoulders. It's all right, she said softly. These are my family. She gestured gently, one by one. That's Grandpa Carlisle, she said, smiling up at him. He's very kind, and very clever. Carlisle inclined his head, eyes soft. And that's Grandma Esme, Alice continued. She makes the best home you'll ever know. Esme's breath caught, just slightly. That's Uncle Emmett, Alice said, amusement warming her tone. He's loud, and he laughs a lot. Emmett grinned, careful not to loom. Uncle Edward, she went on. He listens very closely. Edward nodded once, solemn. And that's Auntie Rosalie, Alice finished. She's very good at fixing things. And protecting people. Rosalie's gaze flicked to Teddy, then back to Alice, something unreadable passing through her eyes. Teddy absorbed this, serious and thoughtful. Then he nodded, decisively. Okay, just like that. The tension didn't vanish so much as loosen, like a held breath finally let go. Carlisle moved first, slow and careful, kneeling so he wasn't towering. Hello, Teddy, he said gently. I'm Carlisle. Teddy studied him for a long moment, head tipped slightly to the side. You're the grandpa, he concluded. Carlisle smiled, something soft and genuine easing into his expression. I am. That's good, Teddy decided, satisfied. Esme came next, hands clasped in front of her like she was afraid to reach out too fast. I'm Esme, she said quietly. Teddy leaned closer to Alice, whispering, I like her. Alice smiled, almost amused. Everyone likes her. Esme mock scowled. Emmett crouched a little awkwardly, grin carefully restrained. Hey, buddy. Teddy squinted at him. You're big. Emmett laughed, quickly stifled it. Yeah, that happens. Edward stayed where he was, not intruding. Teddy looked at him curiously. He's listening, Alice said. Edward inclined his head. Teddy nodded back, solemn. Okay. Rosalie didn't speak at first. She just met his gaze, steady and unapologetic. Teddy considered her, then said, You're pretty. Rosalie blinked, then smiled. Alice felt the circle close. Inside the house, the warmth settled around them, lamplight soft and forgiving. Teddy stayed tucked against her side, his small hand gripping her sleeve as if anchoring himself. Then Rosalie disappeared. She returned moments later carrying a small bundle that wriggled slightly, letting out the tiniest, most indignant squeak. Alice felt Teddy stir before she heard it. His brow furrowed, his nose scrunched, one eye opened, then the other. What's that? He murmured, voice thick with sleep. Rosalie crouched in front of them, lowering the bundle just enough for Teddy to see. This, she said, entirely too pleased with herself, is yours. The puppy was absurd. 2 big paws, too much fur, a tiny street. Bernard, all brown and white in sleepy curiosity, blinking up at Teddy as if equally unsure of how this had happened. Teddy froze. Alice felt the exact moment his body went rigid in her arms. Mine, he whispered. Rosalie nodded. Yours. Harry made a sound behind them. Absolutely not. No one looked at him. The puppy yawned. Teddy gasped. Alice felt it then, the instant, irrevocable shift. The way his heart tipped forward and never came back. She's fluffy, Teddy breathed. Rosalie's smile turned triumphant. She is. Teddy looked up at Alice, eyes wide and hopeful in a way that should have been illegal. Mummy. Alice didn't look at Harry. Didn't look at anyone. She smiled down at Teddy, warm and certain. Looks like you've been chosen. Harry rubbed a hand over his face. I knew it. I knew the second you laughed at lunch, this was my fate. Emmett clapped him on the shoulder. You should have said no louder. Esme laughed softly. Carlisle's lips twitched. Emmett lingered half a step back, unusually restrained for him. His grin softened as his gaze flicked between Teddy and Alice, watching the way she held him, the way the child fit there so naturally. Teddy shifted, careful now, leaning toward the puppy while still half in Alice's arms. Alice adjusted again without thinking, giving him space, giving him support, never fully letting go. The puppy sniffed Teddy's fingers and licked them experimentally. Teddy giggled, a bright, startled sound that filled the room. Alice felt it hit her like gravity. This was it. This was the moment. Rosalie straightened, arms crossing again, satisfaction written plainly across her face. She met Alice's gaze, something like approval passing between them. Told you, she said quietly. He's yours. Alice didn't argue. She didn't need to. Teddy curled back into her, one hand still reaching toward the puppy, the other gripping her sleeve. His head tipped against her collarbone, heavy with happiness and exhaustion all over again. Alice held him, and in that moment, surrounded by quiet laughter, soft lamplight, and the weight of a child who had chosen her without hesitation, Alice understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't fate. This wasn't magic. This was family, built not by blood or prophecy, but by presence. And she was ready. Section break. Teddy fell asleep the way children do when the world finally stops asking things of them. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just, gradually. His breathing evened out first. Then his grip on Alice's sleeve loosened, though he never let go entirely. His head tipped sideways, cheek pressing into the cushion beside her arm. Mouth parted just slightly in a way that made him look younger than his 6 years. Softer, untouched by the day he'd just lived through. Alice didn't move, neither did anyone else. The room had gone still in a way that had nothing to do with vampires. It was the quiet that gathered around something fragile and precious, as if sound itself understood it had no right to intrude. Esme was the first to react, though react was hardly the word. She hovered a step closer, hands clasped together at her waist, eyes fixed on Teddy's face with something like awe. "Oh," she breathed, barely audible. "He's beautiful." Carlyle smiled faintly, the expression gentle and unguarded as he studied the slow rise and fall of Teddy's chest. "He feels whole," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Emmett leaned back against the wall, arms folded, grin gone entirely. When Alice glanced at him, he caught her eye and mouthed, "Tiny human," shaking his head like he couldn't quite believe it. Edward stood very still, gaze resting on Teddy with an intensity that wasn't intrusive, just observant. Respectful. Rosalie watched from the other side of the room, expression unreadable. After a moment, she straightened and jerked her head subtly toward the hallway. Alice hesitated, then carefully shifted. Teddy stirred at the loss of contact, brow creasing, but settled again when Alice positioned him properly on the sofa and brushed her fingers through his hair. She followed Rosalie into the quieter space beyond. Rosalie didn't waste time. "So," she said, arms crossing. "How did that happen?" Alice blinked. "What?" Rosalie's eyes flicked back toward the living room. "That," she repeated. "Children don't just fall asleep next to people they met hours ago. Especially not like that." Alice swallowed. "I didn't plan it," she said honestly. "I didn't even know if I was doing it right." Rosalie raised a brow. And I kept wondering if I was enough," Alice admitted quietly. "If I could be what he needed. If I was, pretending." Rosalie studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Good," she said flatly. Alice frowned. "Good. You're not allowed to mess this up," Rosalie continued, voice low and blunt. "Not because he's fragile, because he's chosen you." Her gaze sharpened. "Children don't do that lightly." Alice's chest tightened. Rosalie stepped closer. "So if you're in, you're in. No half steps. No doubts you don't confront." A pause. "He deserves better than uncertainty." Alice met her gaze steadily. "I know." Rosalie searched her face, then gave a single approving nod. "See that you remember it." When Alice returned to the living room, Edward was waiting. He didn't speak right away. Just inclined his head slightly, an unspoken question. Alice answered it anyway. "I was afraid," she said softly, "that I wouldn't be good enough." Edward's expression didn't change, but his voice was gentle. "He didn't think that." She looked up at him. "When you introduced us," Edward continued. "When everyone spoke. When the puppy appeared." A pause. "He kept checking where you were. Not for permission, for certainty." Alice's breath caught. "He didn't wonder if you could be his mother," Edward sighed. "He assumed you already were." Alice closed her eyes briefly. "He thinks the world of you," Edward added quietly. When she sat back down, Teddy shifted immediately, drawn back toward her warmth, his small hand curling into the fabric of her sleeve as if he'd never left. Alice rested her hand over his back and let herself feel it. The weight, the trust, the terrifying, beautiful responsibility of it. Around them, the Cullens watched, not as witnesses to magic, but to something far rarer. A child who felt safe. And a woman who understood, without doubt now, that she had been chosen. Section break. The night didn't end so much as it settled. It softened, voices lowered, laughter thinned into something quieter, warmer. The house seemed to exhale, as though even the walls understood that the day had carried enough weight. And did not need to be hurried toward anything else. Teddy had fallen asleep without ceremony. One moment he had been nestled against Alice's side on the sofa, fingers loosely curled into the fabric of her sleeve. The puppy tucked securely against his chest. The next, his breathing had evened out, lashes resting against his cheeks, his entire small body slack with the deep, unguarded trust of a child who felt completely safe. Alice hadn't moved, not when his head tipped against her shoulder. Not when the puppy shifted and resettled with a tiny sigh. Not even when she realized, distantly, had everyone else in the room had noticed. They gathered without meaning to. Carlyle stood near the fireplace, hands folded loosely behind his back, his expression reverent in a way that surprised Alice despite herself. Esme hovered closer, her gaze soft, almost luminous, as if she were memorizing the moment for later. Emmett crouched near the armchair opposite them, resting his forearms on his knees, watching Teddy with an uncharacteristic stillness. Rosalie lingered near the doorway, arms crossed, chin lifted, but even she couldn't quite hide the way her posture softened, the edge of Sommet hing protective flickering across her features as she watched Teddy sleep. Edward leaned against the far wall, head slightly tilted, eyes distant but intent. No one spoke. It felt sacred, not in a religious sense. In a human one. Alice felt it then, the quiet, collective awe of immortals confronted with something fleeting and perfect. A child, asleep. Rosalie was the first to move. She crossed He roomed silently and stopped beside Alice, studying Teddy for a long moment before looking up. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and careful. He trusts you. It wasn't a question. Alice didn't look away from Teddy. She adjusted her arm slightly, ensuring his weight was supported, that the puppy remained snug against him. He chose, Alice said quietly. I didn't make him. Rosalie's eyes narrowed just a fraction. Not disapproval, assessment. And you're all right with that? Alice finally met her gaze. I am, she said simply. Rosalie held her stare for another second, then nodded once. You'd better not screw it up, she said flatly. Something warm settled in Alice's chest. I won't. Rosalie's lips twitched, just barely, before she stepped back. Edward approached next. He didn't come close, just enough to speak without disturbing Teddy, his voice pitched low. He thinks the world of you, Edward Said. Alice blinked. When you introduced us, Edward continued gently, he kept checking you. Not for permission, for certainty. And when Rosalie brought out the puppy, he didn't just accept it. He accepted it through you. Alice swallowed. I wondered, she admitted quietly, if I was good enough. Edward smiled, small and sincere. He never did. Then he stepped away, leaving the words behind like something fragile and precious. Time slipped. Eventually, Harry stood. He caught Carlyle's eye, then looked around the room. His expression steady but serious. There's something I need to do, he said quietly. If that's all right. Carlyle nodded at once. Of course. Harry turned to Alice. Are you okay? He asked. She looked down at Teddy. Then back at him. Yes, she said. We are. Harry moved to the open space near the center of the room, removing the ring from his finger with care. Alice felt the shift immediately, the air tightening. The space holding its breath. He reached for her first. Can you hold my left hand? He asked softly. Alice adjusted Teddy carefully, ensuring he remained asleep, then extended her free hand to Harry. Carlyle stepped forward next, followed by Esme. Edward and Emmett joined them, forming a quiet circle. Harry closed his eyes. With his right hand, he lifted the black stone from the ring. Once, twice, 3 times. The room changed. They appeared slowly, not tearing through the air, but stepping into it as if from memory. Andromeda Tonks stood first, tall and composed. Her gaze immediately finding Harry, then Teddy. Remus Lupin followed, smiling softly, pride and relief etched into every line of him. Nymphadora Tonks grinned, bright and familiar, her hair a cheerful, unmistakable pink. Alice's breath caught. Harry opened his eyes. Andy, he said gently. Remus. Dora. Then he turned slightly, guiding Alice forward with him. "This is Alice," he said. "My wife." Harry gestured around the room. "This is Carlisle Cullen," he said. "Esme Cullen, Edward Cullen, Emmett Cullen, Rosalie Cullen, and," he added, his voice quiet but sure, "these are Teddy's parents, Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks. And Teddy's grandmother, Andromeda Tonks." Remus looked at the Cullens, then back at Harry, and smiled. "Though I suppose," he said lightly, "you are his family now." Carlisle stepped forward. "And you're all right with that?" Remus didn't hesitate. "I don't have to be," he said, nodding toward Harry. "He is. And we trusted him to look after Teddy. Since he's okay with you, so are we." Esme spoke then. "Thank you." Just 2 words, heavy with meaning. Andromeda inclined her head, her expression thoughtful, then kind. "Take care of my boys," she said quietly. Alice felt it land, not as instruction, but as trust. She nodded. "I will." The figures lingered a moment longer. Then, gently, they faded. The room settled again. Alice looked down. Teddy slept on, undisturbed, his hand still curled into her sleeve. And for the first time, the word forever didn't feel daunting. It felt earned. Harry woke to the faintest shift of weight beside him. Not a sound, not really. Just the kind of movement you only noticed when you were already half awake and your body had memorized the presence of someone else. Alice lay curled against him, her head tucked near his shoulder as if she belonged there. As if she had always belonged there. Her hair was a dark spill across the pillow, a contrast against skin that never warmed and yet somehow made the room feel less cold. For one irrational second, Harry allowed himself the luxury of pretending. No war, no duty, no schedules, no careful planning, just this. Then, from the small kiddie bed they had dragged into the room, came a tiny snort and a muttered complaint. "No puppies in bed." Harry blinked, slowly turned his head. Teddy was sprawled across the little mattress like he had fought it in his sleep and won. One arm hung off the edge. The other was tucked beneath his cheek. The puppy was not in the bed, because Harry had drawn a hard line there last night, but the fact that Teddy was arguing with an invisible puppy in his dreams felt like a personal attack. Alice's lips curved faintly, as if she had heard it too. Harry looked back at Teddy, then at Alice, then at the ceiling. This was his life now. It should have terrified him. Instead, it made something in his chest loosen, a knot he had not realized he was carrying. He shifted carefully, mindful of Teddy, mindful of Alice. She did not sleep, not truly. But she rested, and that alone still felt like a miracle he had not earned. Alice's eyes opened, bright and focused immediately, as if her mind had never left the room. "Morning," Harry murmured. She watched him for a beat, then leaned in and pressed a slow kiss to the corner of his mouth. Not the kind meant to start anything. Not yet, just something that made a statement all on its own. "Morning, husband," she said, quiet and amused. Harry exhaled, a laugh caught between relief and disbelief. "You are enjoying that word far too much." Alice shrugged, elegant even while half tucked under the duvet. "I think I have earned the right." Teddy rolled over with dramatic force, as if he could sense happiness and had decided to interrupt it on principle. "Daddy," he mumbled, eyes still closed. Harry's heart did the stupid thing again. The lurch, the softness. The instant awareness that this was a privilege and also a responsibility that could snap his spine if he let it. "I'm here," Harry said softly. Teddy opened one eye, squinted at the ceiling, squinted at Harry, then his gaze slid to Alice. He stared at her for a long moment, like he was checking she was still real. Then he shut his eye again and declared, completely satisfied, "Okay." Alice's expression softened so sharply it almost hurt to look at. Harry knew that look. He had seen it on Andy, on Hermione, on Molly Weasley, once, when she thought nobody was watching. The look that said, "I am in it now. Fully. No escape routes." Harry reached over and brushed Teddy's fringe back with the lightest touch. Teddy made a noise of approval and burrowed deeper into his pillow. Alice shifted closer, her shoulder pressing into Harry's side. "He really is a good child," she murmured. Harry huffed softly. "He is an angel," he said, then added, quieter, "most of the time." Alice's lips twitched. "And the rest of the time?" Harry glanced at the door, as if the puppy might kick it open and demand custody of the house. "The rest of the time he wants a dog." Alice turned her face toward him, eyes bright with mischief. "He already has one." Harry looked at her, wounded. "That is not helping my case." Alice kissed him again, quick and sweet, then slipped out of bed with the kind grace that made even ordinary movement look deliberate. She crossed the room and leaned over Teddy, smoothing the blanket around him. Teddy's hand immediately reached out, found her wrist, and held it like an anchor. He did not wake, he just held on. Alice looked down at him for a second too long. When she straightened, she met Harry's eyes and something unspoken passed between them. Something quiet and terrifying and very simple. Mine, ours. Harry sat up and ran a hand through his hair. All right, he said, forcing his voice into something practical before he drowned in feelings. School day. Alice shot him a look over her shoulder. I know what day it is. Yes, Harry agreed, but I am still going to say it out loud, because if I do not, there is a chance I will decide school is optional. Alice's smile was instant and unfair. For you or for me? Harry pointed at her. Do not tempt me. She walked past him and plucked the amulet from the bedside table, fastening it around her neck with calm familiarity. The chain settled against her collarbone. The pendant lay flat, unassuming, like it had always been there. Harry watched for the reaction he had already seen yesterday. The instinctive pause. The moment she remembered what sunlight used to mean. Today she did not pause. She just wore it. That, Harry realized, might have been the most extraordinary thing he had ever witnessed. He got up, pulled on clothes, and went through the motions of being a normal man with a normal morning. If normal men had a vampire wife and a magical child and a house protected by spells older than most civilizations. Downstairs, the Cullen house was already awake in its own quiet way. Carlyle sat with a book open in his hands. Esme was near the kitchen, as if habit alone still belonged to her even if she never cooked. Edward leaned against the wall, arms crossed, expression neutral in a way that only meant he was listening to everything. Emmett was, predictably, leaning like he owned the room. Rosalie looked up as Harry entered, her gaze going immediately past him. Teddy, she asked. In the room, Harry replied. Sleeping. For now. Esme's face softened. He slept well. Harry nodded. Like a rock. Edward's eyes flicked to the stairs. Then back to Harry. Good. Alice came down a moment later, dressed for school, looking like Alice but also not. There was something different now, something sharper in the way she carried herself. Not just confidence, ownership, as if she had stopped shrinking to fit the world. Harry's gaze caught hers and held. Emmett made a gagging sound. Oh, for the love of God. Alice rolled her eyes. Good morning to you too, Emmett. Harry grinned. I have missed having a proper audience. Edward's brow lifted. That sentence explains far too much about you. Harry turned to Carlyle. Because Carlyle at least pretended to be a civilized adult. I was thinking, he began. Edward sighed like he already knew what was coming. I am going to drop Alice to school, Harry finished. Silence. Then Emmett's grin widened, slow and delighted. Oh no. Alice blinked. Harry. Edward closed his eyes for a second, like he was praying for patience. You cannot be serious. Harry looked between them, innocent. Why would I not be serious? Alice took a step closer, her voice careful. Because nobody in Forks knows who you are yet. Harry smiled, the kind that had started bar fights and ended arguments before they began. Exactly. Edward's eyes snapped open. No. Emmett started laughing. Oh yes. Carlyle lowered his book with measured calm. Harry, he said gently, what exactly are you planning to do? Harry shrugged, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. I am planning to drop my wife to school. Rosalie's lips twitched. That is not the part that worries me. Esme looked at Alice, then at Harry. And something in her expression said she knew exactly what this was. Not recklessness, not carelessness, a choice, a declaration. Alice stared at Harry for a moment, as if trying to see through him. You want to make a scene. Harry's grin turned boyish. I would never. Edward's voice went flat. You absolutely would. Harry held up a hand. Fine. A small scene. Alice's eyes narrowed. Why? Harry looked at her then, fully. Not teasing, not joking, just honest. Because you walked out on me once, he said quietly. Because you were scared. Because you thought you had to disappear to keep everyone safe. He stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she would hear it. I am not letting you disappear again. Not in your head, not in your life, not in a school full of people who think they can look at you like you belong to them. Alice's throat moved, subtle. Edward's jaw tightened, because he could hear every word and hated that he agreed. Emmett coughed into his fist, pretending he was not listening. This is going to be fun. Alice took a breath. Then she tilted her head, an almost reluctant smile forming. Fine, she said. Drop me. Harry's eyebrows rose. That was easy. Alice leaned in, her lips close to his ear. Don't get cocky, she murmured. If you embarrass me, I will make you regret it. Harry's smile turned wicked. Mrs. Potter, he said softly, I am counting on it. Edward made a sound of suffering. Rosalie actually looked pleased. Esme touched Alice's arm briefly, warm in the way only Esme could be without warmth in her skin. Have a good day, she said. Alice nodded. I'll survive. Carlyle looked at Harry, the faintest warning in his gaze. Be mindful. Harry nodded, respectful. Always. Edward muttered, that is a lie. Harry ignored him and moved toward the stairs. I'm going to wake Teddy. Emmett called after him, delighted. If you get punched by a teenager today, I want details. Harry paused, glanced back, and smiled. If I get punched by a teenager today, Emmett, it will be because you willed it into existence. Section break. Teddy woke like he did everything fast. 1 second he was asleep. The next his eyes were open and he was sitting up, hair sticking in 6 different directions. Blinking like he had been switched on. He looked around, saw Alice, smiled. Mummy, he said, as if testing the word again just to make sure it still worked. Harry's chest did that stupid thing again. Yes, Harry said firmly, before anyone could second-guess anything. Mummy. Teddy nodded, satisfied. Then he looked at Harry. Daddy, he shouted, launching himself forward. Harry caught him automatically, lifting him off the bed and spinning him once. Teddy squealed, delighted, and clung tighter. Alice stood nearby, watching, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she softened and stepped closer, adjusting Teddy's collar like she had been doing it all her life. We're going to drop me at school, she told Teddy. Teddy frowned. Why? Because I have to go, Alice said patiently. Teddy looked like he hated that answer. Then his gaze slid to Harry. You come too. Harry grinned. I'm coming too. That, apparently, was acceptable. Teddy beamed. Okay. Harry got Teddy dressed, fed him quickly. And by the time they were ready to leave, Teddy was bouncing on his heels, excited by the novelty of everything. New house, new people, new puppy, new mummy, and now a new trip. Outside, the air was damp and cold. Forks weather, familiar in the way it always was, like the sky had signed a contract. Harry walked to the driveway. The white Lamborghini sat there like an insult to the concept of subtlety. Alice looked at the car, then at Harry. You could have picked something less loud. Harry shrugged, unrepentant. It's the one I've got. Edward made a sound that might have been pain. Logistics were settled quickly, because they had to be. Edward's silver Volvo S60R pulled out first, Rosalie already in the passenger seat, Emmett climbing into the back with a grin that suggested he was enjoying this far too much. Teddy scrambled in after them, entirely pleased by the idea of riding with everyone at once. You behave, Harry told him. Teddy nodded solemnly. I will. Harry did not believe him for a second. The Lamborghini followed. Forks noticed. The white Gallardo did not belong here. It cut through the morning mist like a deliberate provocation, engine low and confident, draw. Wing eyes before anyone even registered who was inside. At the school, the Volvo rolled in first. Familiar. Expected. Cullen normal. Students barely glanced. Then the Lamborghini arrived. Conversation stuttered. Heads turned. Alice stepped out of the passenger side. Harry followed. He did not hesitate. He came around the car, took her face in his hands, and kissed her. Not rushed. Not shy. A kiss that said mine. Clearly and without apology. The parking lot inhaled as one. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead briefly against hers. I will pick you up in the evening, Mrs. Potter, he said quietly. Be good. Alice's lips curved. I always am. Harry smiled. Liar. She flicked his chest lightly. Go. He kissed her once more, shorter this time, deliberate, then stepped back. Alice turned and walked toward the building without looking back. Only then did the Volvo's rear door open. Teddy hopped out, eyes already locked on Harry. Daddy. Harry caught him easily, lifting him up and settling him on his hip without breaking stride. You ready, mate? Harry asked. Teddy nodded, satisfied. Okay. Edward stood beside his car, arms crossed, expression tight in a way that suggested the day had already gone poorly. Harry met his gaze, smiled, and said nothing. The Lamborghini roared to life. Harry drove away with Teddy beside him. Behind them, Forks High buzzed with speculation. Because Alice Cullen had just been dropped off by a stranger in a supercar, kissed like the world was watching, and claimed without ambiguity. And nobody knew who he was. Yet, section break. The Forks police station looked exactly like Alice had once described it to Harry. Functional, quiet, A building that existed to be useful rather than impressive. Harry parked a respectful distance away, not because anyone had told him to, but because he understood places like this. You did not arrive announcing yourself. You arrived like you planned to stay. Teddy hopped down from the passenger seat, blinking up at the gray sky. Then immediately reached for Harry's hand. Where are we? He asked. Police station, Harry replied easily. We're saying hello to someone important. Teddy considered this. Is he nice? Harry smiled faintly. We're about to find out. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and paper. A woman at the desk looked up, took in Harry, then Teddy, then the way Teddy leaned comfortably against him. Her expression shifted, not alarmed, not welcoming, just attentive. Can I help you? She asked. Yes, Harry said politely. I'm looking for Chief Swan. Have a seat, she said after a beat. I'll let him know. They waited less than a minute. Charlie Swan appeared in the doorway with the look of a man who had learned to assess people quickly and reserve judgment longer. His gaze went to Harry first, then Teddy, then back to Harry. Yes, Charlie said. Harry stood. Harry Potter. I'm new in town. Charlie's brow twitched, just slightly. Not recognition. Curiosity. This is Teddy, Harry added, glancing down. My son. Teddy waved. Hi. Charlie paused, then nodded once. Hi. There was a beat. A silent weighing of posture, tone, intent. What can I do for you, Mr. Potter? Charlie asked. Harry did not rush. I wanted to introduce myself. I've recently moved to Forks, and I prefer being upfront rather than having people wonder who I am later. Charlie's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. That's usually a good policy. Harry continued, calm and open. I work in antiquities, appraisal, recovery, consultation. I'm going to be setting up shop soon. So if anything ever crosses your desk that needs expert verification, stolen artifacts, historical items, that sort of thing, I'd be happy to offer my services. Charlie studied him for a moment longer. You're offering help, not asking for anything. Yes, sir. Charlie's eyes flicked to Teddy again. And you too, just the two of you out here. Harry nodded once. For now. Charlie didn't push. He simply asked, you connected to anyone in town? This time, Harry answered plainly. Yes, I'm engaged to Alice Cullen. I'm staying with the Cullens at the moment while we get settled. That did it. Not dramatic, not instant, but the shift was there. The faint easing around Charlie's eyes. The way the name anchored Harry in something Charlie already understood. Carlisle Cullen, Charlie said, more statement than question. Harry nodded. Yes. Charlie exhaled once, slow. Dr. Cullen is a good man. So I've gathered, Harry said, and meant it. Teddy tugged Harry's sleeve. Can we go now? Harry looked down. In a minute. Charlie's lips twitched. Kids have a way of keeping things simple. Harry's expression softened. He's good at that. Charlie straightened. All right, Mr. Potter. Welcome to Forks. Harry extended a hand. Charlie took it, firm and brief. As they turned to leave, Charlie added, almost casually. Forks isn't big on strangers. But if you're with the Cullens, people will adjust. Harry nodded. I figured. Charlie's gaze went to Teddy one last time, then back to Harry. Take care of your boy. Harry's answer came without hesitation. Always. Outside, Teddy squeezed his hand as they walked back to the car. He was nice, Teddy announced. Harry glanced back at the building once, thoughtful. Yes, he said, he was. And as they pulled away, Harry was already aware of it. Not acceptance. Not yet. But something just as important. A door that hadn't been shut. Section break. Forks General Hospital looked exactly like Alice had described it. Small, functional, quiet in the way only small towns managed, where familiarity replaced efficiency and everyone see me. To know where they were going without needing signs. Teddy squeezed Harry's hand as they stepped inside, eyes already darting around with interest. Why are we here? He asked, tilting his head. Harry smiled down at him. We're saying hello to Grandpa Carlisle. Teddy brightened instantly. Oh, that apparently explained everything. They approached the reception desk, where a woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose glanced up, paused, and took Harry in with open curiosity. Yes, Harry offered an easy smile. Hi, could you check if Dr. Cullen is free? Let him know Harry Potter and Teddy Potter would like to see him. The receptionist blinked once, then twice. She recovered quickly, fingers already moving across the keyboard. I'll let him know. Harry nodded his thanks and guided Teddy toward a nearby bench. Teddy hopped up immediately, swinging his legs. A few moments later, Carlyle appeared from the corridor, white coat immaculate, expression softening the instant he spotted them. "Harry," he said warmly. Then he looked down. "Teddy." Teddy beamed. "Hi Grandpa." Carlyle laughed quietly and crouched slightly. "Hello, Teddy." Harry watched the exchange with something like fond resignation. There was no stopping this. Not now. Possibly not ever. Teddy's smile faltered just a little. He put a hand on his stomach. "Daddy," he said, voice solemn. "I'm hungry." Harry sighed. "You just ate." "That was before," Teddy replied. As if this were self-evident. Carlyle straightened, eyes twinkling. "Well, we can't have that." Harry opened his mouth, closed it again. "You really don't have to." "Nonsense," Carlyle said easily. "Come on." They walked together toward the cafeteria, passing nurses who slowed just enough to notice, orderly glances flicking between the unfamiliar young man and the child Cal. Ling, their chief physician grandpa, with absolute confidence. Carlyle returned moments later carrying a tray. A sandwich, a muffin, a juice box. Teddy's eyes widened. "All of that?" Carlyle smiled. "All of that." Teddy attacked the food with enthusiasm, pausing only to look up mid-bite. "Thank you, Grandpa." Carlyle ruffled his hair gently. "You're welcome." Harry felt it then. The shift. The barely perceptible hum of attention in the room. Staff pretending not to listen. Curiosity rippling outward without a single word spoken aloud. By the time Teddy finished and leaned back with a satisfied sigh, the story had already begun walking. Harry stood. "We won't keep you." Carlyle nodded. "Anytime." They left together, Teddy swinging Harry's hand happily as they headed back outside. Behind them, Forks General Hospital returned to routine. But it would not forget. Section break. The Edward interlude. By the end of first period, Edward understood something important. This was not going away. The initial shock had passed. But the echo hadn't. It had settled into the building, into the corridors and classrooms and the spaces between thoughts. Forks High didn't erupt. It absorbed. It mulled. It repeated. Edward heard it everywhere. Not loudly. Forks never did loud. Forks did persistent. Who was he? Did you see the car? Did you see her? Was that really her boyfriend? Did you see the way he kissed her? Edward kept his eyes forward. Jaw tight, mind stretched thin by the sheer volume of it. Alice was holding steady. He could feel that much, even without looking. Her thoughts were disciplined, deliberately anchored to lessons and notes and routine. She was not spiraling. She was not rattled. That, Edward realized with irritation, might have made it worse. Because the attention didn't bounce off her. It stuck. By lunch, the theories had grown teeth. Someone swore the car cost more than most houses in town. Someone else insisted he was older, not a student, not local, not anything Forks could easily categorize. A few minds lingered, uncomfortably, on the kiss itself. Edward shut his locker harder than necessary. He was not jealous. He was exhausted. This was what happened when Summit Hing Extraordinary brushed too close to a town that thrived on sameness. People stared, people speculated, people filled gaps with fantasy because reality felt too sharp to hold. And Alice, infuriatingly, simply, existed. She moved through the day like she had already decided that the world's opinion was none of her business. The final bell rang, and the building exhaled. Edward lingered near the parking lot, arms crossed, listening to the low hum of departing thoughts. He scanned the road beyond the trees without quite meaning to. No white car, no spectacle, which meant the point had already been made. The morning had been enough. Students drifted away in clusters, voices overlapping, theories half-formed and unfinished. Alice stepped out with the rest of them, calm and unhurried, as if the day had gone exactly as planned. Edward was just beginning to relax when the sound cut through it all. Low, distinct, expensive. He didn't need to see it to know. The white Lamborghini rolled back into view like a deliberate insult to restraint, sunlight flashing off polished metal as it slowed at the edge of the lot. Heads turned, thoughts spiked. Edward closed his eyes for half a second. Harry Potter got out again. Not rushed, not hurried, like a man who knew exactly how much damage he was doing and was perfectly content with it. He didn't look around. He looked only at Alice. Edward watched the ripple spread in real time. The intake of breath, the sharpened focus, the immediate, electric recalibration of attention. Harry crossed the distance, cupped Alice's face in both hands, and kissed her. Not quick, not shy, a kiss that said mine without apology. Edward grit his teeth. Harry didn't rush it. Of course he didn't. He took his time like a man who understood exactly how many eyes were on him and did not care in the slightest When he finally pulled back, his hands lingered at Alice's jaw for a second longer than necessary. Not possessive, not controlling, just certain. Alice laughed softly, something warm and private, and leaned in to say something Edward could hear perfectly clearly. Show off. Harry's mouth curved, pleased. He said nothing else. He didn't need to. He turned, opened the passenger door for her, waited while she slid inside, then closed it with deliberate care. Only then did he move around to the driver's side. The Lamborghini's engine purred to life. RKS High School collectively lost its mind. Edward felt it happen in real time. The sharp spike of attention. The rush of thoughts crashing into each other, voices overlapping so fast they blurred. Did you see that? They're leaving together. He came back. Why did he come back? That car has to be illegal. She looks different. She looks happy. And then, bright and unfiltered, Jessica Stanley's Thogue. HTS cut through the noise like a thrown match. I would totally have his babies. Edward's jaw locked. He didn't look at Alice this time. He didn't want to see if she'd heard it. He didn't want to see if it landed. The car pulled away smoothly, white and impossible and entirely out of place, disappearing down the road like it had never belonged there at all. The parking lot buzzed long after it was gone. Edward turned toward his own car just as Rosalie stepped up beside him, her expression coolly satisfied. Well, she said lightly, that was fun. Emmett joined them a second later, grinning like he'd just watched his favorite sport. Did you feel that? He asked, delighted. I think half the school forgot their own names. Edward didn't answer. He got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out without waiting for commentary. Rosalie settled in smoothly, unbothered. Emmett leaned back, still amused, tapping the dashboard with restless energy. So, Emmett continued, is it too early to say he's my favorite? Edward drove. Forks blurred past the windshield, the town settling back into itself as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Edward knew better. This wasn't noise. This wasn't drama. This was groundwork, and he had a very strong suspicion that by the time the evening was over, Harry Potter would have given him plenty more to be irritated about. Section break. The house was already occupied when Edward returned to it. Alice was in the living room with Esme, seated close but not touching, their heads inclined toward each other in quiet conversation that paused. The moment Edward and the others stepped inside, Alice looked up first. She did not look rattled. She did not look pleased either. She looked occupied, as if something inside her had not yet finished arranging itself. Edward registered it instantly. Harry was not there. Neither was Teddy. The absence pressed in around the edges of the room, louder than sound. Emmett shut the door behind them and leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Grin already forming. Rosalie lingered near the staircase, her attention sharp and evaluative. Esme remained beside Alice, her presence steady, observant. Edward stood still. Where are they? Emmett asked lightly, glancing toward the hall. Alice answered without looking at him. Teddy wanted to ride again. Edward's jaw tightened. Ride again. And Harry, Alice added calmly, did not say no. Rosalie's lips curved. Shocking. Edward crossed the room once. Then again. His movements were measured, but the tension beneath them was not. The school had not left him. Not the building, but the residue of it. Thoughts did not vanish just because the source was gone. They lingered, replayed, reframed. He had endured hours of it. Curiosity, speculation, desire, projection, all of it circling Alice like she was something newly discovered and poorly understood. She had walked through it without flinching. That rankled. You're quiet, Emmett observed. That's usually when things explode. Edward stopped and turned on him. Do not start. Emmett lifted his hands, unapologetic. Just noticing. Alice shifted then, folding her hands in her lap. She did not look at Edward. She looked ahead, as if listening inward. Edward knew better. She was thinking. He did that on purpose, Edward saw it. Alice lifted her head. Yes. No hesitation. No confusion. No denial. Just agreement. Rosalie's brows rose. You sound surprised. I'm not, Edward replied flatly. I'm irritated. Esme's voice cut in, gentle but firm. Edward. He stopped, not because of the tone, but because he realized he was circling the wrong problem. It was not Harry. It was the town. Forks did not know how to handle disruption. It chewed on it, turned it over, invented reasons until the unfamiliar felt manageable again. And Harry Potter had walked straight into that ecosystem and made Alice the center of it. Edward resumed pacing, slower now. They didn't just notice, he said. They kept going, all day, every class, Every corridor. Alice looked at him then, finally. Her expression was composed, but not distant. I know, she said quietly. Edward stopped again. Do you? Yes. That single word unsettled him more than any argument could have. He was thinking about the way Alice had not looked to him once for reassurance today. Not in the corridors. Not in the parking lot. Not afterward. Section break. Daddy. Harry didn't take his eyes off the road. Yes, mate. Ice cream. Harry blinked, then Mock narrowed his eyes at Teddy. You'll spoil your stomach before dinner. Teddy absorbed this information in silence. Then he deployed the look. It was quiet, calculated, eyes wide, mouth small, head tilted just enough to suggest innocence rather than strategy. The puppy face, refined through trial and error and now used with devastating precision. Harry held out for a full 3 seconds. Then he sighed, long and theatrical, flicked the indicator on, and guided the car toward the next turnoff. Teddy gasped like a man witnessing a miracle. Yes, he cheered, pumping a tiny fist. Don't celebrate yet, Harry warned. One scoop. Teddy nodded enthusiastically. Okay. The supermarket parking lot was damp and gray, utterly unremarkable. Forks at its most ordinary. Harry parked, cut the engine, and looked down at Teddy. Stay close. I always do, Teddy said, already unbuckling. Inside, Teddy insisted on pushing the basket. Harry allowed it, even when the basket wobbled and nearly clipped a stack of cereal boxes. They made it halfway down the frozen aisle before Harry felt it. The attention, the recognition. Harry did not turn immediately. He did not need to. He could hear the small hitch in a stranger's breath, the half-step pause, the recalibration that happened when someone decided they had just found something worth filing away as gossip. He looked up anyway. Charlie Swan stood 2 aisles over with a basket hooked in the crook of his arm, looking like he had come in for something simple and been blindsided by a white supercar. A young man who carried himself like money was an afterthought, and a child pushing a basket with absolute conviction. Charlie's eyes narrowed slightly in thought. Then they widened, just a fraction. As recognition landed. Mr. Potter. Harry's mouth curved, polite and easy. Chief Swan. Charlie huffed and shook his head. Charlie. Harry nodded once. Harry, then, Ted. Why chose that moment to peek around the basket handle, face bright as if every new adult in the world was there for his personal introduction tour. Hi, Teddy said. Charlie's mouth twitched into something almost like a smile. Hey there, big man. Teddy straightened, visibly pleased with the title. We are getting ice cream. Charlie's gaze flicked back to Harry, amusement softening his eyes. Sounds important. It is, Teddy said solemnly. As if there were rules and standards at stake. Harry exhaled through his nose, resigned. Life and death, apparently. Charlie shifted his basket slightly, casual but not careless. You settling in all right? Getting there, Harry said. Still figuring out the basics. Charlie nodded, then glanced down at his basket like he had only just remembered he was in the middle of shopping. I'm stocking up, he said. Voice neutral, but the thought behind it was not. My daughter's moving in later this week. Harry's expression stayed steady, but his attention sharpened all the same. Yeah, Bella, Charlie said, coming from Arizona. Teddy tugged Harry's sleeve, impatient with adult conversation. Daddy, ice cream. Harry looked down at him. Yes, I heard you the first time. Teddy's eyes widened. Now, Harry stared at him. You are going to be the end of me. Teddy smiled, sweet and unrepentant. Charlie watched that exchange for a moment, something in his expression easing. The tiniest crack in the sheriff's usual guardedness. He adjusted his grip on the basket. All right, Charlie said, nodding at Harry. See you around, Harry. See you, Charlie, Harry replied. Charlie's eyes dropped to Teddy again. You behave, big man. Teddy nodded, very serious about it. Okay. Charlie walked on, disappearing around the end of the aisle, and Teddy immediately tried to steer the basket toward the freezer section like a man who had waited long enough. Harry let him, because this was his life now. And somehow, he did not mind it at all. Section break. The house settled into its evening rhythms the way it always did. Quietly, as if the day had never been strange at all. Teddy, of course, was the exception. He had eaten dinner with the fierce focus of a child who believed every bite mattered. Then played with the puppy until his eyelids started losing the argument. By the time Alice eased him onto the sofa, he barely made it through the first yawn before he was out. Not sprawled, not starfished, just folded into her side like he belonged there, one hand still curled in her sleeve, the other resting near the puppy's warm, wriggling bulk. Harry watched it for a moment longer than he meant to. He told himself it was because he was checking Teddy's breathing, checking the puppy, checking the room. Anything practical, but the truth was simpler. Teddy had chosen, and the use had rearranged itself around that choice. Alice shifted her arm, careful, making space for the puppy to nose Teddy's fingers without waking him. The puppy did, satisfied, then curled up with a soft huff. Teddy made a small sound and settled deeper into Alice's shoulder. No one spoke for a while. Carlyle sat in the armchair with the same composed stillness he wore like a second skin. Esme hovered near the edge of the room. Not hovering over Teddy exactly, but close enough that it felt like instinct. Emmett was on the other sofa, looking too entertained by the entire day to be trusted. Rosalie stood by the window, arms crossed. Expression smug in a way that suggested she considered the puppy a personal victory. Edward paced. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough that the air around him felt restless. Like tension with a heartbeat. Harry didn't call it out. Nobody did. Edward stopped only when he reached the far end of the room. He stared at the floor for a beat, then looked up at Harry. His voice was level. That was what made it worse. You are more trouble than you are worth, Potter, Edward sighed. Harry, amused, kept his own voice calm. Yes, I had a great day too, Edward. Thanks for asking. Edward ignored that. Do you have any idea what I had to endure today because you could not stop behaving like a newly-wedded couple? Harry's mouth twitched. I was not aware I required permission to kiss my wife. Edward's jaw tightened, and for a split second Harry saw real teeth behind the civility. I am not talking about permission, Edward sighed, still quiet. I am talking about the fact had I spent an entire day listening to teenagers, grown adults, and people who have lived in this town for 50 years lose their minds because a white Lamborghini turned up at a high school parking lot. Emmett made a choking sound that might have been laughter. Edward shot him a look that promised retribution later, then continued without raising his volume. They did not just stare, Edward sighed. They constructed entire lives for you between first and third period. Harry leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, watching Teddy for a moment before his gaze slid to Edward. There was no challenge in it. No provocation, just awareness. Edward took a breath through his nose like he was trying to remember what patience felt like. You know what Jessica Stanley said? Edward asked, as if presenting evidence in court. Harry's expression went mildly curious. Should I? Edward's mouth went flat. She said, and I quote, that if you looked at her like that, she would, and I am being generous by paraphrasing, totally have your babies. Rosalie made a soft, delighted noise. Emmett's shoulders started shaking. Esme pressed her lips together as if trying not to smile in front of the sleeping child. Alice did not laugh. She did not react loudly. She didn't stiffen in a way a human might. But Harry saw it anyway, the smallest pause, a fractional stillness at her spine. Not fear, not anger, something quieter, something that landed. Edward noticed too, because of course he did. He looked at Alice for half a second, then dragged his attention back to Harry, as if refusing to make that her problem in this moment. And that, Edward sighed, voice still controlled, was one of the milder thoughts. Emmett lost the battle entirely and had to cover his mouth with his fist. Stop, Edward snapped at him, still not loud, but sharp. Emmett raised both hands in surrender, eyes bright with glee. I'm not doing anything. You're doing it. You're making it fun. Edward glared at him again, then turned back to Harry. You could have dropped her off like a normal person, Edward sighed. You could have waved. You could have smiled. You could have been forgettable. Harry arched a brow. Forgettable. Yes, Edward sighed. Forgettable. You could have let her exist without turning the entire building into a hive. Harry's gaze flicked to Alice again. Her face was calm, but her fingers, where they rested against Teddy's shoulder, had tightened just slightly. Harry exhaled once, slow, then spoke gently, because Teddy was asleep and because whatever this was, it didn't need teeth. I did not do it to torment you, Harry said. Edward's laugh was quiet and humorless. You did it anyway. Harry nodded once, accepting the charge. I did it because I want the town to get used to the idea that she is not available. Edward's eyes narrowed. Forks does not work like that. They don't get used to it. They feed on it. Harry's mouth curved faintly. They will get bored. Edward's stare suggested he doubted the existence of boredom in Forks. Carlyle chose that moment to speak, calm as ever, like he was stepping into a conversation about weather. If it helps, Carlyle said, I spent part of my day answering questions about my grandson. Harry turned his head. Oh, Carlyle's lips twitched. Half my senior staff asked me why they hadn't seen him before. They were very invested. Emmett made a strangled sound. Rosalie looked pleased again, as if this too was her victory. Harry's eyes warmed. And what did you tell them? I told them they would find out soon enough, Carlisle said, mild. It seemed safest. Harry nodded. Good. Keep it vague unless someone pushes. If they do, you can tell them what I told Charlie. Edward's head snapped slightly. You told Charlie. Harry looked at him. Yes. What exactly did you tell Charlie? Edward asked, voice dangerous in its restraint. Harry didn't flinch. That I'm engaged to Alice. That I'm staying here while she finishes school. That I work in antiquities and I'm setting up shop. Edward stared at him for a long beat. And when he asked about Teddy, Edward sighed slowly. What did you say? Harry's expression did not change. I said he's my son. That landed like a stone. Not because anyone doubted it. Not because anyone thought it was untrue. But because it made it official in a way words rarely managed. Esme's eyes softened. Rosalie's gaze sharpened, like she approved of the finality. Edward's jaw flexed once. Then he looked away, like the argument had shifted and he hated that part of him respected the move. Harry kept his voice even. So yes, if anyone at the hospital asks again, you can tell them we're engaged. Keep it simple. Carlisle nodded. Understood. A silence followed, quieter now. The edge of Edward's frustration had nowhere to go, because Teddy was asleep and because Carlisle had already made it mundane. Gossip proofed it, in his own way. Harry let the quiet sit. Then he spoke again, casual on purpose, like he was commenting on the weather. Well, Harry said eventually. If it makes you feel any better, this will all be old news by the end of the week. Edward's eyes flicked back. Why? Harry shrugged. Charlie told me his daughter's moving in later this week. Edward froze. Not outwardly, not dramatically, but Harry felt it anyway, the way the room's attention shifted. The way even Emmett went still. Carlisle's brows rose just slightly. Charlie's daughter. Harry nodded. Bella. Edward saw nothing. For the first time since he'd started pacing, he stopped completely. Harry watched him, not unkindly. If there was anything Edward Cullen liked more than control, it was distraction. Anything that pulled the town's attention away from the Cullens, away from scrutiny, away from the constant pressure of being watched and measured. A new girl in Forks was exactly the kind of thing this town would chew on for weeks. Edward exhaled once, slow. It wasn't relief. Not yet, but it was something like the idea of it. Emmett broke the silence first, voice low, amused. Oh, thank God. Edward shot him a look, but it didn't have the same bite it had 10 minutes ago. Harry's gaze moved to Alice again. She was still holding Teddy. Still steady, but her eyes were distant. As if she'd heard Jessica's words and tucked them somewhere she wasn't ready to open. Harry filed that away. Not for tonight. Tonight was for letting the house breathe. Teddy shifted in his sleep, snuggling closer to Alice without waking. The puppy made a tiny, offended squeak and settled again. Esme's voice came soft, almost reverent. He's a good child. Harry didn't answer immediately. He just watched Teddy's small hand tighten around Alice's sleeve. Then, quietly, he said, yeah. He is. Edward stood very still, staring at nothing. And Harry understood, with a strange, clear certainty, that whatever came next. Bella Swan or gossip or Volturi or anything else, it would not be the town that broke them. It would be the small things. The sentences people tossed out like jokes. The realizations that followed, and what you chose to do with them.